Hello, my dear friends. They painted their faces with poison and called it beauty. Beneath the glow of candlelight, the women of Tudor England smiled through pain, their skin cracking beneath layers of lead, mercury, and blood. Every touch of powder brought them closer to death, yet they believed it was grace. Behind every flawless portrait was a body quietly collapsing. Tonight, you will step into their world, where elegance was lethal, vanity was faith, and beauty itself was a slow kind of dying. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soothing background, and let's embark on this journey together tonight. If one were to look upon the faces of Tudor women walking through the narrow streets or seated in candlelit chambers, the first thing to notice would not be the expression of the eyes, but the colour of the skin. It was not the shade of life, but of something colder, more deliberate, like wax pressed against marble. Pale skin was not just a sign of beauty, it was a declaration of survival. A woman's worth could be measured by how white her face appeared beneath the dim light. The paler she looked, the higher her chances of being considered pure, wealthy, and untouched by labour. In that time, colour itself carried a social order. The darkened skin of those who worked outdoors belonged to the poor. The ivory faces belonged to those who stayed inside. To appear pale was to seem protected from hunger and from the sun that marked bodies with proof of toil. So women did what was needed to erase warmth from their faces. They turned to powders made from white lead, ground fine and mixed with vinegar or water until they formed a smooth paste. This substance was spread thickly across the skin, hiding every freckle, scar, and trace of illness. It hardened as it dried, creating a mask that looked calm and still even when the woman beneath was trembling. The lead blended with her pores, sinking in with every application. Beneath the illusion of health, her real skin weakened. Cracks appeared first at the corners of the mouth, then around the eyes. The same hands that touched rosary beads and combs now smeared poison onto their faces each morning. It is strange how devotion to beauty and devotion to faith both demanded quiet suffering, and neither promised salvation. The powder was not soft or clean. It carried a metallic scent that clung to the air, mixed with traces of sweat and candle smoke. The sensation was heavy, almost suffocating. Women felt the mask tighten as they smiled, the surface resisting movement. A single day of wear could leave the skin raw, yet they reapplied it without hesitation. Underneath the fine clothing, the skin began to die little by little. But in mirrors, the reflection seemed perfect. Mirrors did not reveal decay. They only returned the pale glow that society adored. Modern beauty products promise radiance through science, yet the obsession with flawless skin has changed far less than one might think. Tudor fashion completed the illusion. Ruffled collars framed the whitened faces like halos. The rest of the body could be imperfect, but the face had to remain untouched by the world. Servants mixed the paste before dawn, their fingers grey from constant exposure. Some added vinegar for a smoother texture. Others used egg whites for a shine that caught the light. Those who could afford perfumes masked the sour smell of metal with floral oils. To step outside barefaced was to invite gossip, so even sick women forced themselves to paint on the mask. Powder dusted across the furniture and floated in the air like a ghostly fog. Every breath drawn in a noble household carried a trace of lead. The danger was invisible. Slowly, the poison crept beyond the skin into blood and bone. Hair began to thin, teeth loosened, and the jaw stiffened. Some women found their faces swelling in strange shapes, the skin peeling like paper. They called it the price of grace. The more the mask damaged their faces, the more they needed it to cover the wounds it caused. No doctor could help them. The cure was worse than the sickness, and the sickness was beauty itself. Husbands praised their wives for looking pale, unaware that every compliment pushed them further toward illness. Courtiers and poets wrote verses celebrating whiteness, believing it divine. The court became a theatre of death, wearing the disguise of elegance. Outside palaces and manors, the influence spread. Even women of modest means tried to imitate the nobles. They mixed cheaper powders with chalk or ground bones. The results were harsher but no less desired. Poverty never protected anyone from vanity. It only offered different poisons. Those who could not afford mirrors trusted the eyes of others to tell them if they were beautiful, and others lied politely, because politeness was safer than the truth. In a world ruled by appearance, honesty was a dangerous indulgence. I often think the cruelest part of history is not how people suffered, but how they learned to suffer beautifully. The irony was cruel. The same pale colour that symbolised purity came from filth mined from the earth. The substance that promised youth ensured decay. The women who looked most alive were already fading beneath the surface. Their faces gleamed in portraits, preserved for centuries, while the real flesh beneath the paint long ago turned to dust. Artists admired their stillness, not knowing that it was the stillness of poison-hardening skin into calm perfection. Generations later, their descendants would study those portraits and call them timeless. The truth behind the glow remained buried, as if beauty could erase the suffering that created it. There were whispers even in their time. A few healers suspected the powders. They saw the same sores on every pale woman's face and warned of hidden danger, but their warnings were dismissed. It was easier to believe that the weak fell ill and the strong endured. After all, not every beautiful woman died young, only enough to keep fear alive. The rest lived long enough to teach their daughters the same routine. In this way, the poison became tradition. The recipe for the mixture passed from hand to hand, from mothers to daughters, as carefully as family jewels. Generations of women learned to whiten their faces and shorten their lives without question. The mask of purity defined an era. It turned suffering into elegance and sickness into status. The Tudor world valued silence and composure, and the mask offered both. Behind it, the face could no longer betray fatigue, fear, or feeling. The illusion of calm was complete. It was not only an aesthetic, but a form of control. To be pale was to be disciplined, restrained, and acceptable. Those who refused the mask risked more than ridicule. They risked being seen as common, or worse, as disobedient. In the quiet rooms of the great houses, beauty was a rule, not a choice. The history of this white face is not about vanity alone. It speaks of class, obedience, and the fear of being forgotten. For women who had no voice in politics or religion, beauty was the only weapon allowed. They sharpened it with powders and paid the price in blood. Centuries later, the portraits remain, glowing under museum lights, silent and still. The poison has vanished, but the hunger for perfection lingers like a scent that refuses to fade. The pale mask defined the Tudor woman. It hid her pain and displayed her worth. Beneath its smooth surface, her real skin suffered unseen. Yet the desire to appear flawless did not end there. As the mask spread across faces, another form of beauty was taking shape, one that demanded colour where life was already draining away. In the glow of candlelight, the white face would soon burn bright with crimson. They called it the bloom of life, but it was nothing more than the colour of mercury pressed into the skin. Red cheeks were a sign of health, of youth, of a woman untouched by sickness or despair. To lack colour was to look weak, to seem near death. So women painted life back onto their faces, even when it burned. The deeper the red, the more admired it became. A faint blush meant timidity, but a bold crimson meant vigour and fertility. In the Tudor world, Beauty was not about softness or comfort. It was about proof. Red cheeks meant a woman's blood was strong, her heart lively, her body worthy. No one cared whether the colour came from life or from poison. The paint used to achieve that glow was made from mercury sulfide, a mineral once prized by alchemists. Ground into powder, it shimmered faintly, catching the candlelight like embers. Mixed with fat or vinegar, it turned into a paste that clung to the skin. When first applied, it tingled with a strange heat. Within minutes, the cheeks would flush bright, as if lit from within. The illusion worked perfectly for a while. Beneath the surface, however, the metal seeped through pores, setting in motion a slow corrosion. The same substance that made mirrors shine now settled beneath women's skin, polishing them from the inside out until the flesh began to fail. Merchants sold small boxes of this red mixture in crowded markets. They promised it would make even the dullest face glow like the Queen's. The boxes bore elegant designs, suggesting refinement rather than danger. Women trusted the promise because it was printed in gold and delivered with confidence. They did not know that the brilliant pigment came from the same compound used to gild weapons and treat wounds. The boundary between medicine and makeup barely existed. Anything that could stain the skin could be called beauty. The richer the colour, the greater the illusion. At court, the red cheeks became almost uniform. Servants helped their mistresses prepare for appearances, applying the mixture with small brushes or fingertips wrapped in cloth. Each layer deepened the shade, and each layer deepened the risk. The skin beneath began to burn, but appearances mattered more than comfort. Complaints were whispered, not spoken aloud. To endure pain silently was part of grace. The colour flaked after a few hours, leaving patches of irritation. Instead of washing it off, women simply painted over the damage, sealing it in place. The cycle continued until the face itself became a battlefield of sores hidden beneath brightness. Those who could afford it combined the mercury pigment with white lead powder, achieving a contrast of pale and crimson that caught every eye. Portraits from the time show faces that look both alive and lifeless, glowing with unnatural symmetry. Painters admired how the light reflected off the smooth surfaces, unaware that the colour they captured was the beginning of decay. The longer the paint stayed on, the more it consumed the skin beneath. Over time, the pores stopped breathing, the cheeks hardened, and the redness turned from fashion to infection. But infection could also be hidden under new paint. Physicians began to notice the signs: trembling hands, swollen tongues, drooping eyelids. They called it weakness of the nerves or bad humours. No one blamed the pigment. It was easier to believe that delicate women were simply fragile by nature. The truth would have meant condemning the very thing that made them desirable. So the sickness spread quietly through boudoir and chambers, behind lace curtains and polished mirrors. The scent of mercury hung faintly in the air, masked by rose water. It was the perfume of slow death mistaken for beauty. Outside the noble courts, poorer women imitated the same look with cheaper materials. They used crushed red clay or dyed plant matter, sometimes mixed with animal fat or wine. The effect was duller, less dangerous perhaps, but the desire was the same. A woman with red cheeks could pretend she belonged to a higher class, even if the colour faded by noon. Vanity crossed class lines faster than wealth ever could. What began as a royal habit became a street ritual, each woman chasing the same glow, each unaware that the ideal came from sickness disguised as vitality. Men encouraged it, not out of cruelty but from ignorance. They believed red cheeks meant health and fertility, signs that a woman could bear children. They called it natural beauty even when it was obviously painted. The contradiction did not bother them. To appear alive was enough. In this, women learned to play their role perfectly. They smiled through the pain, pretending warmth while their skin blistered underneath. The paint became armour, one they wore daily in a world that gave them little control over anything else. What made the practice endure was not ignorance alone, but pride. To abandon the red was to admit weakness. A pale face without blush suggested poverty or illness. So women continued to paint even when the damage became visible. They believed that a ruined face hidden under colour was better than an honest one left bare. The mask was not just vanity, but survival. A woman without paint was invisible, and invisibility was a kind of death. In choosing the red, they chose to be seen, even if it meant erasing themselves layer by layer. Over time, the idea of beauty became inseparable from the act of harm. To be desirable required endurance, to be respected required control, and both could be achieved with poison. This strange bargain defined Tudor femininity, where pain became proof of elegance and danger became part of the ritual. No one questioned it because everyone shared in it. Like all traditions built on suffering, it became invisible to those inside it. The red that once symbolized health turned into the color of submission, quietly consuming the faces of those who wore it too well. The red glow that once signaled vitality slowly devoured the faces it adorned. Beneath the shimmer of beauty, the skin cracked and burned in silence. And as the color deepened across those painted cheeks, another ritual of adornment awaited, one that turned the lips into yet another stage for poison. The final touch to the Tudor face was always the mouth. It was where the illusion of life had to begin and end. Red lips were seen as a sign of warmth, vitality, and seduction. A woman could not appear noble or desirable if her lips were pale. The colour suggested power over attention, a mark of confidence and control. But like everything else in Tudor beauty, the perfection was an imitation built on poison. The substance that painted those lips red was called cinnabar, a deep mineral red extracted from mercury ore. It glittered faintly when crushed, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. To make the pigment usable, the powder was mixed with wax, fat, or oil to create a paste that softened in the hand and hardened on the lips. The first touch burned faintly, a sensation that women learned to mistake for vitality. The more it burned, the redder it became. A single layer gave only a gentle tint, so they applied more until the colour deepened into a blood-like sheen. The mouth gleamed under candlelight, appearing moist and alive. It drew the eye away from imperfections elsewhere, fixing attention on the lips like an unspoken command. The irony was cruel. The appearance of life was achieved by applying death in disguise. After a few hours, the lips began to dry and crack. Women reapplied the paste to hide the damage, pressing more mercury into the wounds it had created. The skin around the mouth darkened slightly, then blistered. But redness was desirable, and pain could be endured if it meant beauty. Some women used vinegar or wine to remove the residue, unaware that the acids pushed the metal deeper into their skin. The mouth soon became a boundary between life and rot, its colour rich and deceptive. When they smiled, the cracks spread, yet the smile still looked perfect. Servants who prepared the cosmetics handled the cinnabar with bare fingers, unaware that its dust clung to their skin. Their hands trembled over time, a side effect mistaken for fatigue. The pigment was expensive, so the waste was minimal. Every particle was used. Noble households stored small pots of it alongside perfumes and jewellery, as precious as gold. When not in use, they were sealed with wax, though the fumes still lingered. The metallic scent mixed with rose oil, forming a fragrance that clung to curtains and sheets. In such rooms, the air itself seemed tinted red. Painters adored this colour. They used the same cinnabar to capture lips in portraits, sometimes thickening the paint to give texture. The hue was immortalised on canvas long after the flesh it decorated had vanished. Centuries later, those portraits still glow with the same artificial vitality, their lips gleaming as if fresh. What no painting reveals is how those lips must have bled between applications, how they swelled and hardened beneath the layer of paint. The artist saw perfection, but perfection was only another form of blindness. The danger of cinnabar was well known among miners and alchemists, but the world of beauty ignored such warnings. Knowledge was not shared across classes or professions. What was poison in a mine became luxury in a palace. Women did not see themselves as handling metal, only colour. The powder's brightness blinded them to its cost. Once the mouth grew accustomed to the burning, the pain became invisible. They wore their suffering gracefully, because grace was expected. Illnesses began quietly. Tremors, fatigue, and bleeding gums appeared first. Some women lost their sense of taste. Others developed ulcers that would not heal. Physicians, as usual, found other explanations: corrupted air, bad diet, unbalanced humours. Few imagined that beauty could rot the flesh. The face remained untouched in public view because to admit damage was to confess imperfection. Decay was hidden behind poise. Even when the lips darkened unnaturally, some praised the look as fashionable. When the colour turned purple or black, it was called a new shade, not a warning. Among poorer women, substitutes emerged. They used mixtures of crushed brick, berries, or wine residue. These were less deadly, but also less striking. The richer the red, the higher the admiration, so those with money chose the true poison. It became another symbol of class, the dangerous beauty of those who could afford to suffer. To wear cinnabar was to declare status, even as it consumed the body that displayed it. The poorest might envy that suffering, unaware that envy itself was safer than imitation. The mouth, once painted, became part of a ritual. Women learned not to eat or drink in public, for the colour might smear. They spoke little, smiled carefully, and maintained composure even as pain pulsed beneath the surface. To keep the colour was to keep dignity. The lips became an emblem of control, pressed tightly together, guarding both beauty and silence. It was an art of stillness, a discipline disguised as grace. The more they concealed their discomfort, the more admired they became. Over time, the red lips turned into something almost sacred. To paint them was to participate in a silent devotion to appearances. The act itself was small but constant, repeated daily until it lost all meaning beyond habit. Every application was a confession and a concealment at once. Women no longer asked why, only how to make the colour last longer. The poison, by then, had already seeped too deeply to be undone. The lips remained beautiful, even as the voice behind them began to fade. The red lips that once symbolized vitality became quiet evidence of ruin. The more they glowed, the weaker the bodies beneath them grew. And as the colour of death spread through every smile, another beauty ideal emerged, one that reached far beyond the face and into the bones. They believed beauty would protect them. In a world ruled by appearances, paint and powder became armour, and no woman could face society without it. To be barefaced was to be exposed, to risk being seen as sick, poor, or unworthy. Cosmetics promised safety, a way to belong, to be admired, to survive. But in the pursuit of that protection, they created their own destruction. What began as decoration became dependence, and what looked like preservation became a slow surrender. The mask that covered their faces was not a shield at all. It was a mirror of decay. Every morning began the same way. A servant prepared the mixtures, thick and glistening with oil and metal dust. The woman sat still as the layers were brushed across her face, each stroke building a wall between her skin and the world. The powder softened the light on her features, smoothing imperfections, erasing lines, giving the illusion of youth. When she looked into the mirror, she saw not herself but the version she needed to be. That reflection was stronger, cleaner, and more admired. She could walk through halls and receive glances of approval, unaware that her body was absorbing the very substance that would destroy it. The white lead, the cinnabar, the mercury, all of them seeped into her pores. The transformation was not just cosmetic but chemical. The mask melted into her bloodstream, and the poison became part of her. Headaches appeared first, then fatigue. Her limbs trembled as if from the cold. Yet in portraits, she looked eternal. The artists painted the glow of her skin, not the grey beneath it. They captured her beauty and erased her suffering, sealing the illusion forever in colour and oil. No one wanted to remember that the most radiant faces were often those closest to death. The tragedy was not hidden. Physicians recorded symptoms of poisoning. Servants whispered of mistresses wasting away. And yet nothing changed. The connection between beauty and death became normalized. Women accepted the pain as proof of effort, the sickness as part of sacrifice. Vanity was not a sin in this context. It was a duty. To appear beautiful was to fulfill an expectation, to maintain dignity in a world that valued women most when they looked unreal. And so, they continued to paint, even as their skin burned and peeled beneath the surface. There was no escape once the cycle began. The makeup that concealed the damage also caused it, forcing constant reapplication. When sores appeared, new powder was pressed into them. The infection deepened, masked by another layer of white. What could not be healed was simply hidden. The skin turned rigid, no longer responding to touch. The mirror became an accomplice, reflecting only what was meant to be seen. Beauty and rot shared the same face, and no one could tell where one ended and the other began. Behind closed doors, many noble women spent their final years in seclusion. Their faces, once admired in court, became too fragile to reveal. Some wore veils even indoors, pretending it was a mark of modesty. The truth was too cruel to share. The flesh beneath the powder had begun to die. When they smiled, the skin cracked. When they wept, the tears stung against the rawness hidden below. But still, they reached for the jar. Still they painted. Habit had replaced reason. To appear less than perfect was worse than to suffer. It is unsettling to imagine the quiet persistence of this ritual. In the flicker of candlelight, surrounded by tapestries and perfumes, a woman would carefully apply her mask while coughing softly into a cloth. She would steady her hand against the tremor, brush the powder across her cheeks, and then draw a faint red line over her lips. The mirror would smile back, serene and immaculate. The sickness stayed behind her eyes, invisible to the world. She had become both victim and witness, painting her own decline each morning with steady precision. Even in death, the mask remained. When bodies were prepared for burial, servants sometimes reapplied the powders, restoring the pale glow that defined elegance. The illusion had to be preserved for the final viewing. In that strange act, beauty outlived life itself. The mask became eternal, a final statement of dignity in a world that never allowed women to appear as they truly were. There was a cruel poetry in it. The same pigments that poisoned them ensured they would look flawless forever. What makes this history haunting is not only the suffering but the silence surrounding it. No revolution of fashion came to an end the practice. It faded slowly, replaced by other poisons, other ideals. The obsession simply changed form, finding new ways to disguise harm as beauty. Centuries later, the jars of white powder and red pigment sit behind museum glass, admired for their craftsmanship. Few who look at them imagine the hands that trembled while using them. The beauty industry began long before the word existed, and its first customers paid in flesh. The Tudor mask was never about vanity alone. It was about control, how a woman's worth could be painted, how her suffering could be polished until it gleamed. To survive in that society meant to vanish behind layers of disguise, until even her reflection no longer recognized her. Every shade of white and red told the same story, purity built on poison. The painted faces of Tudor women shone with elegance, but beneath the glow lay the quiet rot of mercury and lead. Each smile was another step toward the grave, perfectly measured and beautifully disguised. and beyond the stillness of their masks waited a new obsession, where beauty would demand even deeper sacrifices from the body. The Tudor idea of elegance reached beyond paint and powder. A perfect face was not only pale and smooth, but also shaped to reflect intelligence and refinement. The forehead was the canvas of wisdom, the sign of a calm and noble mind. Women were told that a high, rounded brow made them appear more learned, more virtuous, and closer to the divine ideal. So they began to change their faces, not with colour this time, but with removal. Hair became the enemy of purity. To achieve perfection, it had to be erased. In private chambers, mirrors reflected rows of women leaning toward candlelight, tweezers in hand. They plucked strand by strand along the edge of the forehead, widening it until it seemed almost unnatural. The pain was constant, sharp, and deliberate. A smooth brow was proof of control, a visible mark of discipline. The absence of hair made the face appear longer, giving an illusion of intellect. Those who could afford servants left the painful work to others. Hands trained in silence plucked the fine hair with precision, while the mistress sat still, her skin reddening beneath each pull. Once the work was done, powder covered the irritation, sealing the illusion of effortlessness. The eyebrows, too, were victims of fashion. Thick brows were considered vulgar, a reminder of passion and animal instinct. To be truly noble, a woman's face had to be calm and hairless, untouched by nature. So they shaved or burned them away entirely. Without eyebrows, expressions softened into emptiness. The face became unreadable, controlled, serene. In portraits, the women looked like statues, white, blank, and elevated. Their eyes seemed to float beneath smooth expanses of skin, as if emotion itself had been stripped away. It is unsettling to think that silence and pain were the foundation of elegance, and that the absence of expression was mistaken for grace. The methods varied, but none were kind. Some used blades sharpened on glass, scraping the skin until the small hairs vanished. Others applied lime paste or hot ash, believing it would stop regrowth forever. The chemical burn left the skin raw for days, sometimes infected, but the promise of a permanent solution was too tempting to resist. The smell of lime clung to the air, mixed with perfume to hide the sting. Women pressed cold cloths to their foreheads at night, feeling the ache beneath the powder. They told themselves it was worth it. After all, beauty had always demanded proof of endurance. At court, the look became universal. A woman with untouched brows was considered careless, even rebellious. The higher the forehead, the higher the status. Artists exaggerated the effect in paintings, making the foreheads broader, the faces smoother, until reality disappeared entirely. What the canvas recorded was not humanity but hierarchy. The body had become a tool to display obedience, a symbol of conformity painted across the skin. The more a woman erased herself, the more she was praised for refinement. Beyond the palaces, poorer women imitated the trend with cruder methods. Without mirrors, they relied on touch and the judgment of others. Lime was cheap, and so was ash. Many burned their skin without realizing the damage until scars appeared. Still, they continued, because beauty was a language understood by everyone, even those who could not afford luxury. The marks of suffering were proof of belonging. It didn't matter that no one saw the pain, only the result. Modern standards may claim to be different, but the same idea lingers. Refinement still often means erasure. The process was ritualistic. Each woman faced herself in the mirror and decided what to remove that day. A servant heated the ash or prepared the lime, whispering instructions learned from older women. The first touch burned, the second burned deeper, the hair curled, the skin blistered, and yet the hand did not stop. When the pain became unbearable, perfume was dabbed over the wound, the scent of roses mixed with the acrid smell of lime, creating something both delicate and terrible. They waited for the skin to heal, only to repeat the act when even the faintest regrowth appeared. Beauty left no room for rest. What made the ritual powerful was not vanity but control. In a world where women had little authority, their faces became the only spaces they could command. Every act of shaping, plucking, and burning was both submission and defiance. They obeyed the ideal, but they did so with their own hands. The mirror became both enemy and confessor, reflecting the price of acceptance. Behind every smooth forehead was a history of small private wounds, endured in silence because silence was part of the performance. The physical result was striking. Under candlelight, the absence of brows and hair gave the illusion of a glowing face. The forehead caught the light, the skin shone pale against the darker room. Men praised the look as angelic, pure, detached from desire. They saw serenity where there was only exhaustion. They admired what they could not feel. For women, the look became a mask not just of beauty but of obedience. They learned to wear emptiness as elegance, to transform suffering into stillness. Some records mention infections that spread from these practices. The burns deepened into ulcers, and scars formed under the powder. Physicians advised covering them with more paste, never realizing that the remedy only worsened the wound. Women lived with a constant sting of damaged skin, smiling faintly as if nothing hurt. The fashion would change in time, but the idea behind it never really vanished. To look refined was to look altered. To appear noble was to hide pain under composure. The legacy of those bare foreheads lingers in the paintings left behind. They hang in museums, glowing under soft light, admired for their stillness. Viewers see poise, not agony, the smooth skin, the calm gaze, the erased emotion. All of it was labour turned into myth. The women inside those portraits no longer exist, but their silence endures. Their faces, stripped of hair and expression, remain as perfect as they were told to be. The smooth foreheads and empty brows of Tudor women were celebrated as symbols of refinement, yet they spoke of quiet suffering disguised as discipline. Each strand removed was a concession to control, each burn a small act of obedience, and as the skin healed beneath the layers of powder, another ritual of transformation waited, one that would scorch not just the face but the very scalp itself. Tudor women often looked to the heavens for beauty, believing that the closer they appeared to light, the closer they seemed to virtue. Pale hair was a mark of angelic grace, a sign that one was pure, refined, and favoured by fortune. Dark hair, by contrast, carried the shadow of common birth and earthiness. To transform what nature had given them, they turned to what their own homes and kitchens could provide. Bottles of vinegar, bowls of urine, and sunlight itself became their tools. It was a method that promised radiance but delivered pain. The process began quietly. Servants collected urine, usually from the first hours of the morning, when it was said to be strongest. The liquid was left to stand until the smell became sharp and unbearable. Mixed with vinegar or sometimes lemon juice, it formed a crude acid. Women dipped combs into the solution and dragged them slowly through their hair, saturating every strand. The scent filled the room, heavy and sour. They endured the stinging as the mixture touched the scalp, believing that beauty required patience. The burning was dismissed as proof that it was working. Once the hair was coated, they carried stools or chairs into the open air. Noon was best, when the sun stood directly overhead and heat pressed against their skin. They sat with their heads uncovered, the mixture heating under the rays. The combination of acid and sunlight drew out the pigment, stripping colour from root to tip. Hours passed in silence, the smell of vinegar rising with the heat. Flies circled lazily in the light, drawn to the strange scent. Beneath the surface, the hair shafts weakened, breaking easily when touched. But when the drying was complete, the hair gleamed faintly gold, and for that illusion, the suffering felt worthwhile. The pale colour did not last. Each washing dulled it, so the treatment was repeated again and again. Scalp sores appeared after the first few sessions, but they were ignored. Women wore veils at night to protect their fragile hair from tearing, only to return to the same ritual days later. Those who desired even lighter shades combined the mixture with alum or ashes, making the solution stronger. The result was sometimes blindingly bright, white rather than gold. But the hair fell out soon after. Beauty had no mercy for balance. It is astonishing how pain can so easily disguise itself as progress, and how ruin can pass for radiance when society calls it virtue. At court, blondness became a form of currency. It was the colour of youth and purity, associated with saints and goddesses. The queen herself was admired for her fair hair, and so women around her sought to imitate it. The sight of noble ladies sitting in gardens, heads tilted to the sun, became familiar. They wore wide-brimmed hats with open tops, allowing the light to reach their hair while shading their faces. Servants stood nearby with cloth soaked in vinegar, ready to reapply the liquid as it dried. The heat thickened the air, and the faint hiss of acid working on the scalp was part of the ritual. From a distance, it looked serene. Up close, it was an ordeal. The damage was immediate but invisible at first. Hair turned brittle, snapping under the brush. The scalp flaked and reddened, sometimes blistering. Some women lost entire patches, the bald skin shining beneath what remained. They hid the loss with ribbons, caps, or wigs made from other people's hair. These wigs were perfumed to mask the lingering odour of acid, though nothing could truly hide it. The sweetness of the perfume mingled with the sourness of vinegar, forming a scent that clung to rooms long after they left. Servants who handled the mixtures suffered as well. Their hands cracked from constant contact with acid, their nails yellowed. They were blamed for mistakes when the colour turned too light or uneven, and punished for damage they could not prevent. The air of the noble houses often carried that faint chemical note, a reminder of beauty maintained by discomfort. Even the tools, the combs, the bowls, the cloths, showed signs of corrosion. Beauty was eating everything it touched. Those who failed to achieve the perfect shade faced ridicule. The ideal was exacting, and anything less than golden purity was seen as laziness or lack of refinement. Some women turned to stronger recipes whispered among apothecaries, solutions mixed with saltpeter, or even traces of mercury. They believed that each new attempt might bring them closer to perfection, even as the hair weakened with every touch. The mirror offered no warning. Under candlelight, all looked well. It was only in daylight that the damage revealed itself. The most devoted followed the practice until they were nearly bald. Their scalps shone pale beneath a few remaining strands, yet they continued to bleach what was left. To them, the effort itself had become the proof of worth. The sight of someone enduring pain in the name of beauty was not tragic in that world. It was admirable. Neighbours whispered not in pity but in envy. The hierarchy of suffering was clear. Those who could afford to hurt themselves gracefully stood above those who could not. Physicians wrote quietly about cases of skin disease spreading across the scalp, infections that reached the eyes, and women who fainted from the fumes. Few listened. To question the practice was to challenge the standard of nobility itself. The pursuit of fairness, both in skin and hair, had become moral, almost sacred. To be dark was to be ordinary. To be golden was to be touched by grace. The system rewarded the illusion, never the truth. The portraits that survive from that era still gleam with strands of pale hair, smooth and shining. They do not smell of vinegar, nor do they reveal the burned skin beneath the curls. The faces framed by that gold seem timeless, detached from suffering. But each lock of a light colour was earned through pain, the price of appearing angelic in a world that worshipped illusion. The golden hair of Tudor women was not a gift of nature but a wound disguised as beauty. The acid that bleached their strands also burned the skin beneath, leaving invisible scars, and as their scalps blistered under the sun, they found new ways to mask the pain, covering decay not just with colour but with powder and scent. In Tudor England, the concept of cleanliness did not involve water. To wash too often was considered dangerous, a reckless invitation for illness to enter through the pores. The body could be wiped and perfumed, but the head was sacred ground, rarely disturbed. Washing hair with water was believed to weaken the brain, to let coldness creep into the skull and cause madness or fever, so the hair was left untouched for weeks, even months. Instead of washing, women turned to powders and perfumes, trusting dry substances to do what water could not. Cleanliness became a matter of scent, not hygiene. They began with a base of starch, flour, or finely ground herbs. The powder was sifted through the hair, worked into the roots until it disappeared into the mass. It absorbed oil for a time, leaving a dull matte texture that passed for freshness. To hide the smell of sweat, they mixed the powder with crushed flowers, lavender or dried rosemary. The fragrance rose with every movement, creating a faint halo of sweetness around the wearer. From a distance, the illusion was perfect. Up close, it told another story. Beneath the perfume, the scalp itched constantly. The hair felt heavy, clotted with residue. Scratching only released more scent, mingled with flakes of dust. Combing became the substitute for bathing. Ivory and wooden combs, carved with care, were used daily to spread powder evenly. Servants stood behind their mistresses, pulling the comb through layer after layer of thickened hair. The sound was dry and rhythmic, like leaves rustling in the wind. The process could last hours, but it was done in silence, as if ritual demanded patience. Once finished, the hair was piled high, arranged into elaborate shapes, pinned and wrapped in silk ribbons. These towering structures were meant to show wealth and control. Few dared to imagine what might be hiding inside. As days passed, the mixture of powder, sweat, and oil hardened into a strange crust. The hair beneath no longer moved. It became a structure rather than a living thing. Servants added new layers of powder to maintain the illusion of brightness, unaware that they were building a shell around decay. The scalp could no longer breathe. Lice thrived in the warmth, and the itching grew unbearable. But the greater fear was water, not insects. Women believed that washing their hair would invite death more surely than any infestation. So they endured. They sprayed rose water into the air rather than onto their heads, perfuming the space around their discomfort. The smell of these powdered heads filled rooms where noble women gathered. It was not unpleasant, only strangely artificial, sweet and stale at once. When they bowed or danced, small clouds of dust lifted from their hair, glimmering in the candlelight before settling on furniture and clothes. Over time, these powders dulled the air itself, coating everything in a fine white film. Servants swept constantly, but the residue never disappeared. The same powders meant to keep the body clean slowly dirtied the home. It is almost absurd that a society so afraid of filth managed to live inside it, perfumed and powdered into forgetfulness. In some cases, the hair became so entangled that it could no longer be brushed. Knots formed near the scalp, tightening with each day of neglect. To remove them meant pulling out entire clumps, so women left them alone. They wrapped the matted sections in cloth, creating new styles to hide the damage. Beneath the wrappings, the skin festered. Flies were drawn to the sweetness of the perfumes, and the heat beneath the layers bred movement. Mice found their way into the soft mounds of hair and nesting powder, settling between pins and ribbons. Servants sometimes discovered them while dressing their mistresses, but the truth was rarely spoken aloud. The idea of beauty could not coexist with such images, so everyone pretended not to see. The fear of water was not baseless. Disease was indeed rampant, and cold dampness often preceded sickness. But the solution turned into superstition. The refusal to cleanse gave rise to new dangers no one would name. Physicians recommended scented vinegar rubbed onto the scalp with cloths, but few followed through. The ritual of powder was easier, less invasive, and more elegant. It kept up appearances without requiring confrontation with the body itself. Cleanliness became symbolic, a gesture rather than an act. Those who could afford exotic ingredients experimented with new blends. Ground iris root was prized for its delicate fragrance, though it made the scalp itch. Crushed pearls were added for shine, even though they left a chalky residue. A few apothecaries claimed to sell purifying dust that promised both perfume and protection from disease. In truth, these powders clogged the pores and worsened the rot. Still, the buyers returned. The idea of freshness was enough, even if it was only skin deep. Men followed similar habits, though their shorter hair made the maintenance easier. For women, whose hair represented both virtue and allure, the burden was constant. Their elaborate hairstyles became a test of endurance. Weeks could pass before the structure was taken down. When it finally was, the smell of trapped air and oil filled the room. Servants combed carefully, pulling apart the hardened layers. What came loose was not just hair, but everything that had lived inside it. Some fainted from the odour, others burned herbs to mask it. Yet once the ordeal ended, the process began again. The next morning, the same powders returned, and the same silence followed. The practice endured for generations, carried forward by habit more than reason. By the time reformers spoke of hygiene, the idea of washing hair still seemed indecent. Clean water could cleanse the skin, they said, but not the head. The notion that purity could coexist with decay had become deeply ingrained. Like the powders themselves, it was easier to add another layer than to remove what was already there. The powdered hair of Tudor women shimmered with false purity, heavy with perfume and decay. Beneath the white dust, the scalp was a landscape of rot, alive with what no one dared to name. As the illusion of cleanliness held, their rituals turned darker still, drawing them toward methods that blurred the line between grooming and preservation. The hair of Tudor women was never truly alive. What seemed soft and shining was often stiff, heavy, and lifeless, preserved under layers of oil, powder, and perfume. To maintain beauty, they did not nurture their hair, they embalmed it. Each lock became an artifact, a carefully kept relic of discipline and restraint. The more elaborate the hairstyle, the more it resembled a structure rather than something that grew from the body. In this strange pursuit, life itself had to be slowed down, controlled, and disguised. What others saw as grace was in truth the art of controlled decay. To create these towering shapes, servants coated each strand with a mixture of animal fat, beeswax, and starch. The paste hardened as it cooled, holding the style in place for weeks. Once fixed, the hair was no longer touched. It became an object to be displayed rather than a part of the body. Combs could not pass through it without breaking, and washing was unthinkable. Instead, layers of scented powder were added daily, giving off a faint sweetness that masked the growing odour beneath. From a distance, the hair gleamed softly under candlelight, like polished wood. Up close, it carried the smell of something slowly spoiling. These creations demanded stillness. A sudden movement could cause cracks or dislodge ornaments. Women learned to move their heads carefully, to sit and sleep in positions that would not disturb the structure. Some used padded rolls or wooden frames hidden beneath the outer layers to maintain height. The longer it lasted, the more impressive it seemed. A hairstyle that endured for a month was proof of refinement, yet each passing day deepened the rot beneath the surface. Sweat gathered at the scalp, trapped by the wax. The heat of the body mingled with animal fat, softening it again, and the smell returned stronger. Servants sometimes poured perfume along the edges of the hairline, pretending it was enough. When the style was finally taken down, the reality emerged. The layers peeled apart like the opening of a tomb. The smell of old fat, perfume, and sweat filled the air. Strands came loose in sticky clumps, clinging to the fingers that tried to untangle them. Beneath it all, the scalp was often inflamed, speckled with sores, or crawling with lice. Some described the sensation as constant movement, a living itch that never left. They endured it quietly, believing that true beauty required endurance. To cut the hair short was unthinkable. Long hair symbolized virtue, and virtue demanded patience. The perfumes made matters worse. Oils of rose and musk were mixed into the fat to disguise the stench. But over time, they only added sweetness to the decay. The result was a smell both pleasant and wrong, like flowers left too long in the sun. In small rooms heavy with candle smoke, the air became dense, almost tangible. The fragrance clung to clothes and pillows, marking everything it touched. The beauty of Tudor women was not just something to be seen, it could be smelled, heavy and inescapable, the scent of slow ruin mistaken for luxury. It is strange how the human mind can turn rot into refinement when society teaches it to prefer illusion over truth. The hair itself began to change under the burden. It grew brittle, snapping near the roots. The scalp thickened with residue until new growth struggled to emerge. Servants who tried to clean it found clumps of wax hardened like resin, unyielding to combs or cloth. Some resorted to warming irons or heated oils to melt the layers, only to burn the skin beneath. These rescue attempts left patches of baldness hidden under ribbons or veils. Yet once the hair recovered, the process began again. The cycle of embalming continued, generation after generation, an inheritance of quiet suffering. Men praised these elaborate hairstyles, comparing them to crowns. They admired the precision and order, unaware that beneath the perfection was decay. To them, the scent of perfume was alluring. To the women who carried it, it was a mask for exhaustion. The head became a monument to discipline, a visible sign of the control expected of them. In maintaining their beauty, they proved their obedience. Each day spent preserving that illusion was another day of submission disguised as elegance. Even in death, the ritual persisted. Some women were buried with their hair untouched, wrapped and preserved just as it had been in life. The combination of wax, oil, and powder slowed decomposition, keeping the structure intact long after the body had failed. To those who prepared the dead, it was fitting. The women had lived embalmed. They would remain that way forever. In that sense, their beauty had achieved its goal. It had outlasted them. Over time, the practice became symbolic of Tudor refinement itself, outward grace built upon hidden decay. To be beautiful was to appear untouched by the natural world, to deny the body's needs and disguise its processes. Cleanliness, warmth, and health were sacrificed for the sake of stillness. The more lifeless the hair appeared, the more admired it became. The scent of decay mingled with the sweetness of roses until no one could tell the difference. What survived in portraits was not vitality, but the calm perfection of something long dead. The illusion of purity had a cost that no one spoke aloud. Beneath the polished surface, every woman carried the smell of her own slow ruin, hidden beneath powder and perfume. It was not just hair that had been embalmed, it was identity itself. In this world, to decay gracefully was the highest form of beauty. The gilded hairstyles of Tudor women were monuments to decay disguised as grace. Beneath their scented shells, life itself withered into stillness. As their hair hardened into relics, their faces followed, turning the living body into something preserved rather than alive. Among Tudor women, vinegar was more than a kitchen ingredient. It was considered a cleanser of both body and spirit, believed to draw out impurities and leave behind purity itself. In a society obsessed with pallor, the sting of acid on the skin felt like progress. Water alone was never enough. Water was soft, forgiving, and therefore weak. Vinegar was sharper, stronger, and its bite promised transformation. To many, it seemed the perfect answer to the stains of time and disease that marked every face. Each morning, the ritual began with a bowl of cold vinegar diluted only slightly, if at all. Cotton or linen cloths were soaked and pressed to the face until the skin burned. The smell filled the room, sour and clean at once, cutting through the scent of candles and perfumes. Women waited in silence for the pain to fade, mistaking the burn for proof of purity. When the clothes were removed, the skin appeared brighter for a few moments, polished by the acid. Over time, however, that brightness gave way to thinness, to cracks along the cheeks and lips that bled beneath the powder. Yet the process continued, because to stop would be to let nature win. The use of vinegar spread quickly through every level of society. It was cheap, familiar, and easy to obtain. The poor diluted it with water, while the wealthy infused it with flowers or herbs, believing that beauty could be improved by fragrance. Some added ground rosemary or crushed lavender, not realizing that the oils irritated the skin further. Others experimented with stronger substances, alum for tightening, or even quicksilver in small doses. The face became a laboratory where pain and hope mingled, and the line between remedy and ruin blurred. Merchants sold special bottles labelled as whitening waters. They promised youth and clarity, a return to the smoothness of childhood. The instructions were simple: apply daily, ignore the sting. Women obeyed. The acid stripped away the thin outer layer of skin, revealing a temporary smoothness that resembled youth. But each layer removed brought the next closer to destruction. After weeks of use, the cheeks reddened and peeled. Underneath, the flesh turned sensitive to light and air. Powder soothed it for a moment, then made it worse. The more they treated their faces, the more fragile those faces became. It is cruelly ironic that the quest for purity so often begins with destruction, as if the body must be punished before it can be admired. In noble houses, the scent of vinegar was constant. Bowls sat on dressing tables beside brushes and jars of white lead. Servants dipped their fingers into the liquid, applying it gently to the skin of their mistresses. They were instructed to avoid the eyes and mouth, though accidents happened often. Tears mixed with vinegar left small burns near the lashes. Lips cracked where the acid touched them, yet these injuries were ignored. To be pale was worth the pain. Each sting was a small victory over imperfection. The idea was not entirely unfounded. Vinegar did clean the skin. It tightened pores and removed grime, giving an illusion of refinement. For women living in cities filled with smoke and soot, this cleansing seemed miraculous, but the skin, stripped of its natural defences, soon absorbed everything around it. Soot, powder, and mercury from other cosmetics sank deeper, poisoning the body slowly. What was meant to purify ended by intensifying corruption. Over time, the habit became an addiction. Women carried small bottles of vinegar with them, dabbing their faces in secret throughout the day. Some even inhaled its fumes, believing it kept faintness away. Physicians noted that those who used it most suffered from chronic redness, swelling, and sores that would not heal. Yet these very marks were covered again with powder and praised as signs of delicate skin. Pain had become fashionable. The fragility of the complexion was seen as refinement, a visible distinction from the labouring classes whose skin was rough and darkened by the sun. In some households, recipes grew more complex. A few added crushed herbs known to be toxic, thinking they would enhance the whitening effect. Belladonna, foxglove, and even arsenic found their way into the mixtures. The results were dramatic: skin turned luminous for a time, then sickly pale, then grey. The progression was too slow for most to notice until it was irreversible. The women who used these concoctions became ghost-like, their faces smooth but devoid of warmth. Their beauty looked eternal only because it no longer seemed alive. The social expectation of cleanliness reinforced the practice. A woman who appeared flushed or oily was considered vulgar, even sinful. The pale face represented restraint and moral purity, so the acid continued to flow, poured across generations as a symbol of virtue. Daughters watched their mothers perform the ritual and learned to do the same. The sting of vinegar became a shared inheritance, the first lesson in womanhood. Pain was simply what it meant to be proper. Those who survived long enough to see the damage rarely spoke of it. They covered their ruined skin with thicker powders, building masks that hid every mark. The mirror reflected brightness again, but it was the brightness of erosion. Behind that glow, blood vessels lay close to the surface, ready to burst with the next application. The face had become both fragile and proud, a work of art too delicate to last. The jars and bottles from that era remain in collections today, their labels still promising purity. They are beautiful objects, etched in glass and sealed with wax, glowing faintly with the colour of what once burned flesh. Looking at them now, it is easy to forget what they contained. The women who used them are gone, but their pursuit of impossible whiteness lingers like a scent that refuses to fade. The vinegar that promised clarity stripped Tudor women's faces to rawness, leaving them bright only because they were wounded. Beneath the illusion of cleanliness, the skin withered like parchment in acid. As their faces paled into lifeless masks, their rituals began reaching for new substances even more dangerous in the search for purity. Among the many strange rituals of Tudor beauty, few were as quietly accepted as the use of animal urine on the skin. It was not considered vulgar or unsanitary, but practical, even medicinal. In a world without clear science, what mattered was reputation and result. If something whitened, smoothed, or softened the skin, it was worth using. Sheep and cattle were believed to produce urine rich in cleansing properties, gentle enough to dissolve blemishes yet strong enough to refine texture. The scent was unpleasant, but the effect was praised. It became known not as waste, but as a remedy, a cheap substitute for those who could not afford perfumes or imported oils. The process began early in the morning, when the animals were most active. Servants collected the warm liquid in buckets, often still steaming in the cold air. It was strained through cloth and stored in ceramic jars labelled carefully for household use. Sometimes it was mixed with vinegar or rosewater to soften the smell, though the odour never truly disappeared. Women dipped linen cloths into the liquid and wiped their faces, necks, and hands with slow precision. The first contact burned faintly, and the warmth of it made the skin tingle. They told themselves it was the feeling of purity entering the flesh. The logic behind the practice was simple. Urine was thought to contain natural salts that tightened the skin and reduced redness. Some claimed it cleared blemishes overnight. Others said it could erase freckles and sunspots. The results, when viewed in the softer light of dawn, often seemed convincing. Skin appeared smoother, paler, and more uniform. But beneath that surface calm, irritation brewed. The acid stripped away protective oils, leaving the face tender and inflamed. Over time, the smell became impossible to ignore. Even after washing, it lingered faintly, rising again whenever the skin grew warm. In noble households, the practice was refined rather than abandoned. The urine of young animals was considered superior, believed to be cleaner, gentler, closer to nature's perfection. Servants were instructed to collect only from specific animals at specific times, as if the difference might decide a woman's beauty. The jars were stored discreetly among other cosmetics, their contents hidden behind polished wood and perfumed cloths. When guests arrived, the scent of roses and lavender filled the room, masking the truth. Behind the illusion of luxury, every mirror reflected the same quiet deception. The lower classes followed suit, though without disguise. They could not afford rosewater, so the air around them carried the raw scent of their efforts. It was not shameful, merely ordinary. Mothers passed the habit to their daughters, promising that it would preserve youth. Some even believed it cured rashes caused by harsher cosmetics. The idea spread through small towns and markets, repeated until it became common sense. In time, to question it seemed foolish. Everyone knew someone who swore by its power, and superstition always outweighed discomfort. The physical effects were hard to deny. Continuous use caused swelling around the cheeks and jaw, followed by dryness so intense that the skin cracked. Scabs formed beneath the powder, which only worsened the irritation. Yet each new morning brought another rinse, another chance to erase imperfection. For women who lived their lives under scrutiny, a few minutes of burning felt like a small price to pay. The smell, however, betrayed them. It clung to collars, sleeves, and bed linens. Husbands complained quietly but rarely forbade the practice. They, too, believed that pale, unblemished skin was worth the cost. Apothecaries encouraged it, selling mixtures under polite names such as refining tonic or clarifying water. These concoctions were little more than aged urine blended with herbs to disguise the stench. Customers bought them eagerly, drawn to the promise of affordable purity. Some even compared the tonic favourably to the expensive Italian preparations imported by the upper class. The idea that something so humble could rival foreign luxury gave the poor a strange sense of pride. It was as if beauty, for once, belonged to everyone, even those who lived surrounded by filth. There is a grim humour in how equality sometimes arrives only through misery, when the rich and the poor suffer alike under the name of beauty. Over time, the ritual became more than maintenance. It was identity. The smell of ammonia, faint but constant, followed Tudor women like a secret in crowded gatherings. Beneath the mingling of perfumes and candle smoke, it lingered. Those close enough could detect it but pretended not to. To mention it would be cruel. To acknowledge it would break the illusion. So silence became another ingredient in the recipe. The women knew, the men knew, and yet no one spoke. The irony of the practice was that it often worsened the very conditions it was meant to cure. Skin stripped too often became prone to infection, especially when covered again with powder made from lead or chalk. The combination of acid and metal created a slow alchemy of harm. Blisters rose, then burst, leaving scars that no amount of powder could fully hide. But these marks were blamed on weather, on diet, on fate, never on the beloved tonic that had caused them. Faith in beauty required denial, and denial became a kind of comfort. Even as other trends faded, the use of urine persisted in small ways. Some women dabbed it on their cheeks before bed, believing the night air would strengthen its effects. Others soaked handkerchiefs in it to keep near their faces while travelling. The practice crossed generations quietly, until it was replaced by new substances with new promises. But the idea that pain, smell, and shame could be hidden under the banner of beauty remained unchanged. The relics of that time tell the story in silence. Stone jars stained dark inside, brushes hardened with residue, scraps of cloth yellowed at the edges. They speak of a world that confused purification with punishment, and where every act of care carried a hint of self-destruction. The cheap tonic of Tudor women promised purity but delivered corrosion. The same liquid that washed their faces left behind the stench of decay disguised as virtue. While their skin cracked under the illusion of refinement, they turned to remedies even filthier, convinced that salvation might lie in the unlikeliest of substances. In the pursuit of beauty, Tudor women were willing to use almost anything the world offered, no matter how repulsive. Among their most peculiar inventions was the bird-dropping mask, a treatment whispered about in noble circles and praised for its supposed power to rejuvenate the skin. The mixture combined pigeon or gull droppings with honey or egg white, creating a thick paste that dried quickly and clung to the face like clay. It was said to restore youth, smooth the complexion, and soften scars. The logic was simple enough: if filth could feed the earth and make flowers grow, then perhaps it could nourish human beauty too. What began as curiosity turned into a ritual, and what disgusted outsiders became a mark of refinement. The preparation of this strange cosmetic required patience and secrecy. Servants collected the droppings from rooftops and courtyards at dawn, scraping the fresh remains before the sun baked them hard. The odour was overwhelming, sharp with ammonia and the sourness of decay. Mixed with honey, it turned sticky and thick, the sweetness failing to disguise the rot. The paste was stored in ceramic pots sealed with wax, each labelled carefully as if it were a fine ointment. The irony was that it often sat beside rose oil and imported perfumes, the pleasant and the foul sharing the same shelf. When applied, the sensation was immediate and unbearable. The mask burned slightly, tightening as it dried. Women sat still for hours, breathing shallowly to avoid the smell, their faces hardening into pale crusts. Some believed the stinging meant the treatment was working, purging the impurities trapped beneath the skin. Once dry, it was rinsed away with vinegar or wine, leaving the face flushed and warm. In the mirror, the reflection seemed softer, smoother, alive with a faint glow. The illusion lasted only a few hours before the skin dulled again, but that was enough to justify another application. Pain, discomfort, and disgust became part of the beauty routine, a cycle of endurance mistaken for elegance. Physicians of the time did not entirely dismiss the practice. They claimed the mixture drew out heat from the body, reducing swelling and redness. Their approval lent an air of respectability to the absurd. Noble women began to commission special versions of the mask, enriched with herbs or ground pearls to elevate the experience. The wealthy turned what began as waste into luxury. Servants handled the mixture bare-handed, their fingers stained and their stomachs twisting from the smell. Yet no one complained. The higher the cost, the more dignified the filth became. Within the narrow rooms of Tudor households, this ritual unfolded quietly. Candles flickered against stone walls, casting shadows of still faces hidden behind layers of waste. The air grew heavy with the scent, sweet honey clashing with the pungency of droppings. It clung to everything: hair, linen, and skin. The woman who wore the mask tried not to breathe deeply, exhaling through parted lips, eyes watering as the mixture dried. Beneath the discomfort was a strange pride. They were doing what others would not. They were proving devotion to beauty through suffering, transforming disgust into discipline. It is strange how easily luxury can borrow the language of sacrifice when vanity demands its own religion. Those who used the mask regularly often developed irritated skin. Small sores appeared where the acid in the droppings bit too deeply. Yet these blemishes were excused as signs of healing. The very damage it caused was misread as evidence of success. The worse it felt, the more powerful it was believed to be. The same pattern repeated throughout Tudor beauty culture: pain equaled progress. And the more revolting the method, the more miraculous it seemed. In a world obsessed with purity, filth had found its place as medicine. For poorer women, this treatment offered something else, a rare opportunity to imitate the nobility. The ingredients were free and available to anyone. Rooftops and barnyards provided all that was needed. They mixed the droppings with whatever they had: milk, oil, even water, and spread it over their faces with rough hands. The results were unpredictable, but the act itself was comforting. It was proof that they, too, could participate in the rituals of refinement, even if refinement smelled of rot. In this way, the practice crossed class boundaries, uniting rich and poor in quiet absurdity. Despite its popularity, the treatment left traces that could not be hidden. The smell lingered long after the mask was removed. Even after washing and perfuming, a faint sourness followed those who used it most. In gatherings, beneath layers of rose oil and spice, the odour sometimes rose unexpectedly. Eyes darted, but no one spoke. The silence around these rituals was part of their power. Everyone knew the price of beauty, and everyone agreed to pretend not to notice it. Over time, the mask became symbolic of Tudor vanity itself, an emblem of a world that confused decay with devotion. Women repeated the process endlessly, chasing a glow that faded faster with each attempt. Their faces, softened by acid and irritation, became thin and fragile. The youth they sought was always just one more application away, one more layer of humiliation to endure. In this quiet madness, they had turned the very waste of nature into a reflection of their own desperation. The irony of this history is difficult to ignore. The same people who recoiled at dirt on the streets embraced it in their most intimate rituals. Beauty was not about cleanliness, but control, the power to turn the repulsive into something sacred. When the mask dried, it looked almost holy, pale, and still like marble. Beneath it, however, the skin breathed in poison. The scent of decay followed them wherever they went, invisible yet undeniable. The bird-dropping masks of Tudor women turned waste into worship, coating their faces in the illusion of renewal. Beneath the sweetness of honey lingered the stench of rot that no perfume could hide. While their skins softened for a moment, their bodies absorbed the filth, and their faith in beauty led them towards something darker still. In Tudor England, beauty was not just cultivated, it was fed, and its nourishment came from the strangest sources imaginable. The higher a woman's status, the closer she lived to filth disguised as luxury. What began as a desperate pursuit of purity became an elaborate ritual of decay, dressed in gold and perfume. To touch waste and call it medicine was not madness, but refinement. Each jar, each bowl, each scented cloth represented a world where the most revolting substances were transformed into symbols of privilege. To be beautiful was to endure corruption, to embrace it until it became indistinguishable from elegance. The ingredients of Tudor beauty crossed boundaries no one dared to name. Bird droppings, animal urine, crushed insects, and decaying flowers all found their way into cosmetics. The logic was simple. Nature created beauty, and therefore anything from nature, no matter how foul, could restore it. This philosophy excused everything. The foulest odour was accepted as the smell of transformation. Decay was simply the cost of perfection. In an age without understanding of chemistry or hygiene, women trusted what they could see. If the skin appeared brighter after the burn, the suffering was worth it. Among noble women, the obsession with purity became a contest. The more elaborate the preparation, the more esteemed the result. Wealthy households employed apothecaries to design special treatments combining animal waste with honey, rose water, or even powdered gems. The mixture was presented in small silver boxes, elegant enough to disguise the horror inside. Servants handled these concoctions with care, trying not to breathe too deeply as they stirred. The richer the family, the stronger the smell. Filth had become a currency of status. Each new recipe an experiment in endurance. Applying these masks required composure. Women reclined in their chairs, faces covered in layers of waste softened with oil. The warmth of the body released the scent slowly, filling the room with sweetness and decay. They waited patiently for it to dry, servants fanning them gently to ease the suffocating air. When the mask was removed, their faces glowed, not with health, but with irritation. The skin reddened, tightened, and shone faintly in the candlelight. In that brief moment, they appeared almost divine. The illusion was enough to make them believe the pain had meaning. No one called it what it was. To speak plainly would have ruined the spell. Instead, they gave these treatments graceful names: essence of renewal or mask of purity. The language transformed waste into wonder, filth into fashion. In this way, the higher classes elevated their suffering into art. The women who endured the longest under the smell of decay were praised for their patience. They were admired not only for their beauty but for their composure. To flinch was vulgar. To pretend not to smell was noble. Beneath the silks and lace, every Tudor lady carried her own quiet stench of refinement. There was something almost ritualistic about the process. Beauty had become a kind of faith, and pain was its prayer. Women gathered in private chambers to share recipes, each whispering of new ingredients said to bring miracles. Some added ground eggshells or dried petals. Others preferred the richer texture of droppings mixed with milk. They spoke of glow, of radiance, of youth restored. No one mentioned the rashes, the sores, or the faintness that followed. The face was sacred territory. Whatever happened beneath the skin was irrelevant. It is disturbing how easily devotion can become self-destruction when a society teaches suffering as the path to admiration. For the servants, the rituals were unbearable. They scrubbed the bowls afterward, the smell seeping into their hands. The scent lingered through meals, prayers, and sleep. Some developed coughs or nausea from constant exposure, but their complaints meant nothing. To touch the instruments of beauty was part of their service, as essential as dressing or combing their mistress's hair. In time, the difference between the perfumed and the polluted disappeared. Both lived surrounded by the same odour. Only one was praised for it. As the trend spread, waste itself began to acquire meaning. Bird droppings from certain species were considered more potent, especially from seabirds that fed on fish. Apothecaries charged more for them, claiming they carried minerals from the ocean that brightened the skin. In cities, collectors scoured rooftops for the best samples, earning coins from noble households. What had once been refuse became a resource. The Tudor economy, like its beauty, was built on rot repackaged as refinement. The irony was that the results were temporary. After every treatment, the glow faded quickly, replaced by irritation and dryness. The process had to be repeated, and each repetition deepened the damage. Still, no one stopped. Beauty had become a cycle of renewal and decay, a rhythm that matched the slow disintegration of the very substances used to create it. The scent of decomposition was no longer a warning. It was reassurance that the ritual was working. Even after death, the association between beauty and filth remained. When noble women were prepared for burial, their faces were perfumed and powdered one last time, the same way they had lived. The illusion endured even in stillness. They had spent their lives feeding beauty with decay, and in the end, decay reclaimed them completely. The skin of Tudor women was sustained by waste disguised as luxury, glowing briefly before breaking down beneath its own poison. Decay became elegance, and the smell of death passed for refinement. While their faces shone under layers of filth, they were already preparing for the next ritual that would consume them even further. Among all the deadly ingredients that passed for beauty treatments in Tudor England, mercury was the most deceptive. It gleamed like silver, smooth and pure, a metal that seemed to hold light within itself. In an age that worshipped paleness and perfection, it appeared divine. To the women who used it, mercury was not poison but promise. It was believed to strip away stains, erase freckles, and purify the face until it shone with a cold, even glow. No one understood what it truly did to the body. They saw only the illusion of clarity and ignored the trembling hands, the swollen lips, and the headaches that followed. Mercury offered purity in exchange for slow destruction, and Tudor women accepted the bargain with calm devotion. The substance came to them through apothecaries and travelling merchants, often disguised under names like quicksilver water or divine ointment. It was sold in small glass vials wrapped with linen to prevent leaking, though the faint metallic scent betrayed its nature. Instructions were simple and cruel applied to the dark spots nightly. Rub until absorbed, and wait. The pain was immediate. The skin tingled, then burned, then turned bright red. After a few hours, The outer layer peeled away, taking the freckles with it. Beneath the wounds, fresh skin appeared smooth and pale, almost translucent. It was hailed as proof that the treatment worked. In truth, it was the body's desperate attempt to heal itself. The women who endured this ritual did not see themselves as victims. They saw discipline in their suffering. Vanity was cloaked in the language of moral purity. To them, freckles were marks of sin, proof of the body's imperfection. Each sting of mercury felt like repentance. Every layer of peeled skin a confession. The mirror became a confessional, reflecting not just beauty but absolution. To look pale and spotless was to look redeemed. They whispered prayers as they worked the ointment into their skin, mistaking poison for grace. The signs of damage appeared gradually. Redness deepened to swelling, and blisters formed along the cheeks and chin. Some women could not smile without pain. Their skin cracked with every movement. Others lost sensation in their fingers from constant handling of the metal. Still, they continued. The pain was temporary, they believed, but the beauty might last forever. They covered the burns with powder, hiding the evidence beneath another layer of poison. The more they tried to correct their faces, the more disfigured they became. The cycle tightened like a noose, yet no one dared to step outside it. Apothecaries encouraged the delusion. They spoke of transformation, of renewal, of the metal's mystical power to draw impurities from the flesh. Their words carried authority because the metal truly seemed magical. When stirred, mercury flowed like liquid glass. It rolled across surfaces without leaving a trace, impossible to hold, impossible to control. The very danger of it made it alluring. The women who used it felt that they were touching something rare and divine, something too powerful for ordinary people. To possess it was a privilege, even when it burned. It is unsettling how easily people will mistake destruction for luxury when it arrives wrapped in brightness. Inside the chambers where these rituals took place, the air shimmered faintly with fumes. Small bowls of mercury mixtures sat beside brushes and cloths, their surfaces glinting under candlelight. The smell was metallic and sharp, lingering long after the application. Servants held their breath as they assisted, wiping away the excess from their mistresses' cheeks. Some fainted after long exposure. Others developed coughs that never quite went away. Still, the practice continued. To complain was to risk being seen as weak or ignorant. Obedience was safer than truth. There was a strange silence around these rituals, a collective refusal to acknowledge the obvious. Neighbours noticed the pale, trembling faces of noble women, but called them delicate rather than ill. Physicians, when consulted, prescribed rest and fresh air, not understanding that the poison lay in the ointment itself. Even when entire households began to show the same symptoms, tremors, fatigue, and loss of teeth, no one linked them to the beauty jars sitting on their tables. Disease was easier to believe than vanity turned fatal. The effects of mercury spread far beyond the skin. It entered the bloodstream through the smallest cracks and wounds, settling deep in the body. The mind dulled, memory faded, and mood shifted violently. Some women became prone to sudden laughter or tears, their tempers snapping without reason. Servants whispered that their mistresses had gone mad from grief or jealousy, never suspecting that madness had a physical cause. The tragedy was that the more the poison worked, the more beautiful its victims appeared. The pallor of mercury poisoning was smooth and even, a kind of false perfection that no natural complexion could match. Death, when it came, arrived wearing a flawless mask. Among the poor, imitation products made the situation worse. Unable to afford pure mercury, they bought cheap mixtures laced with arsenic or lead, believing they were improving upon nature. These counterfeit ointments corroded skin faster, eating through layers until the face blistered and scarred. Yet even then, women persisted. They told each other that true beauty required bravery, that the ones who suffered most would shine brightest. The rhetoric of endurance became a shield for cruelty. Beauty was no longer about pleasure or admiration. It was a test of loyalty to an ideal that could never be reached. The noble courts encouraged it silently. Queens and ladies-in-waiting appeared in portraits with porcelain skins so pale it seemed to glow. Artists were instructed to erase blemishes, to soften the lines of fatigue, to make perfection eternal. The painted illusion became the standard that every living woman tried to imitate. To appear less pale was to appear less noble. The poison crept through generations, passed down in jars and recipes. Daughters watched their mothers apply it nightly and learned to do the same. By the time they understood its danger, the habit was too deeply rooted to abandon. In the private moments of recovery, when the burns wept beneath the powder, some women must have realized the truth. They felt the tremors in their hands, the strange fog in their minds, the exhaustion that sleep could not cure, yet even then they returned to the mirror. The reflection, fragile and bright, was enough to silence fear. They did not want to live long, they wanted to live beautifully. That was the cruelest lie Mercury told them, that beauty was worth any cost, even the body itself. Historians later found medical records describing the symptoms without naming their cause. Words like hysteria, weakness, and melancholy appeared again and again beside the names of noble women who had been admired for their looks. Their deaths were quiet, private, unremarkable. The jars of quicksilver vanished into history, but the idea that suffering purifies beauty survived. Even centuries later, it echoes in every culture that equates pain with perfection. The mercury that promised renewal instead hollowed its worshippers from within, turning their skin to glass and their blood to poison. Their reflections shone with lifeless brightness, admired by all who could not see the cost beneath. While they chased the illusion of purity, the poison moved deeper, preparing to claim what little remained of their beauty and their breath. At night, when Tudor households fell quiet and the last candles flickered against the heavy drapes, women performed one of the strangest rituals in their pursuit of beauty. They sealed their faces in wax. The mixture, made of beeswax, oils, and sometimes traces of lead, was melted over low heat until it thickened into a warm, pale cream. It was spread across the face with brushes or fingers, covering every pore until no trace of skin remained visible. By the time it hardened, it formed a mask as smooth as glass, meant to lock in moisture and preserve youth. To sleep with such a covering was an act of faith. To remove it in the morning was often an act of pain. The wax mask was meant to protect the skin from night air, which people believed carried sickness and age. Physicians of the time warned that draughts could cause wrinkles, and so women covered themselves completely, trusting the wax to act as armour. The sensation was suffocating. The mask cooled and stiffened, pulling at the mouth and eyes. Breathing became shallow. Many could not rest at all, but lay still with the heaviness pressing down on them, waiting for dawn. The air trapped beneath the layer grew damp and hot, and soon sweat collected in the hollows of their cheeks. Yet discomfort was not considered failure. It was proof of dedication. When morning came, the removal began slowly. The wax clung tightly, refusing to let go. Servants softened it with warm cloths and oils, peeling it away in careful strips. Sometimes the skin came with it. The freshly exposed flesh was flushed and raw, shining faintly in the dim light. It looked, for a brief moment, smooth and renewed. The women smiled at their reflections, ignoring the sting. Pain was the price of purity, and purity was beauty. The mask had done its work. In noble homes, these masks were prepared in advance, each recipe slightly different. Some contained honey to soothe, others bits of crushed pearl for radiance. The wealthy imported rare ingredients, spermaceti, almond oil, even traces of musk to enhance the scent and texture. Yet the foundation was always the same: wax melted, poured, and hardened into a second skin. Over time, this nightly ritual became a mark of refinement. To sleep barefaced was a sign of neglect, something only servants or the poor would do. The more elaborate the mask, the higher the woman standing appeared. The servants who assisted with these routines dreaded the task. Melting the wax required precision. Too hot, and it burned the face. Too cold, and it hardened unevenly. They stood in the flickering light of the hearth, testing the mixture with their fingers, praying not to make a mistake. The smell of beeswax mingled with oil and smoke, filling the air with sweetness and heat. Once applied, the wax glowed faintly in the candlelight, turning each face into a pale statue. The women looked peaceful in their stillness, but the peace was a lie. Beneath the surface, the skin struggled for air. Those who followed the routine religiously soon began to see its cost. The pores clogged, the skin, deprived of breath, broke out in small sores and rashes. Itching became constant, but scratching risked ruining the delicate surface. Some awoke to find lines of blisters where the wax had pulled too tight. Yet stopping was unthinkable. The mask promised protection, and abandoning it felt like inviting decay. They had been taught to fear their own bodies, to distrust natural rest, so they endured the weight of wax every night, convinced that beauty could be sealed into place if only they tried hard enough. It is darkly funny that in seeking to preserve life, they spent each night practicing a small rehearsal of suffocation. The practice spread beyond the nobility. In towns and villages, women used cheaper versions made from animal fat mixed with tallow candles. These masks were heavier, stickier, and carried the faint smell of smoke. They dripped as they cooled, leaving streaks across the cheeks and neck. But imitation was better than exclusion. To go without the mask was to risk ridicule. Mothers taught their daughters how to prepare the mixture, warning them that bare skin would grow coarse and old before its time. Generations of women fell asleep behind layers of wax, wrapped in their own fear of imperfection. Apothecaries made fortune selling new variations. They called them sleeping veils or nocturnal balms, promising smoother skin and eternal youth. The jars were carved with symbols of purity, flowers, moons, and stars, concealing the horror inside. The instructions were poetic. Let the moon see your covered face, and it shall not see your age. Those who followed the directions too literally found their faces swollen and scarred by mourning. Yet the advertisements continued, their language as soothing as the wax was cruel. Men admired the results without understanding the process. They saw pale, unblemished faces and assumed the women were naturally graceful. The secret stayed hidden behind closed doors, behind the smell of melted wax and the silence of endurance. Husbands never asked what it cost to appear so smooth, and wives never told. The ritual belonged to the night, when the house was still and the struggle unseen. Some women began to experiment, applying the mask during illness, believing it could preserve their appearance even in weakness. A few were found dead with the wax still on, their final expressions frozen into faint smiles. The story spread through towns, half warning, half legend. It was said that those who wore the mask too long might never wake at all, but the rumour only added to its allure. If beauty could last until death, perhaps it was worth the risk. The wax masks left traces that lingered long after they fell from fashion. Pieces of hardened wax have been found in old wooden chests, pale and ghost-like, their curves still shaped to forgotten faces. They are fragile, translucent reminders of the strange devotion that once governed the body. To hold one is to imagine the woman beneath it, lying awake in the dark, unable to breathe yet unwilling to stop. In their pursuit of eternal youth, Tudor women built their own prisons each night. The mask that promised softness hardened into a shell, separating them from air, from rest, from life itself. Beneath its glossy surface, the skin withered quietly, starved of the very thing it sought to preserve. The wax masks of Tudor women promised to protect their beauty, but instead smothered it beneath a shell of false preservation. The stillness of the night hid their silent suffocation, their faces gleaming like polished tombs. As the masks hardened around them, their search for youth drifted closer to something that resembled death. In Tudor courts, beauty was not confined to the face. It extended down the neck, across the collarbone, and over the chest, where pale skin gleamed like polished ivory beneath layers of fabric. The whiteness of a woman's neck and breast was seen as the highest mark of virtue, proof of purity and restraint. To achieve that glow, they turned to cinnabar, the mineral known for its rich red colour, but also its deadly secret, ground into fine powder, mixed with oils or lard, and applied delicately to the skin. Cinnabar created a pearly sheen that glowed in the dim light of candles. It was not merely decoration, it was a symbol of moral perfection painted directly onto flesh. What none of them realized was that the same powder that made them radiant was quietly seeping through their pores, poisoning them from within. In the candlelit halls of Tudor feasts, the effect was mesmerizing. The low flames caught the curves of pale necks and shoulders, reflecting a faint, reddish luminescence. It made the skin seem almost alive, like marble warmed from within. Every gesture, the tilt of a chin, the turn of a head, caught the light and held it, transforming ordinary women into visions of purity. But the illusion came at a price. Cinnabar contained mercury sulfide, a compound as toxic as it was beautiful. Each night's preparation left a little more of it behind, absorbed into the bloodstream, inching slowly toward the heart. The process of applying the powder was ritualistic. Servants began by wiping the skin with vinegar or rosewater to make it smooth and receptive. Then they dusted on the crimson pigment, blending it until it faded into an eerie whiteness. The red tones beneath the pale surface created a natural glow that ordinary powders could not mimic. The women admired the result in polished metal mirrors, unaware that the same brilliance would soon dull their health. The powder clung to their skin like a second layer, sealing it against breath and sweat. Beneath the illusion of radiance, the body suffocated quietly. Among the nobility, the practice became a measure of refinement. A perfectly pale neck implied discipline and moral superiority. Darker tones, or any hint of sun, were seen as vulgar, evidence of labour. To be admired was to appear untouched by nature, as though the body itself had transcended its own life. The skin became an emblem of control, soft, silent, and deadly. Cinnabar made that illusion possible, its beauty so convincing that it blinded its wearers to the danger. There is something disturbingly human about mistaking pain for purity when society demands proof of virtue on the surface of the skin. The sensation after application was subtle at first, a faint warmth, then a slight burning along the collarbone. Some described it as invigorating, as if the body were drinking light. But as hours passed, the warmth deepened into irritation. The skin tightened, small red spots appearing beneath the surface. Still, the women refused to stop. Pain meant that the powder was working, refining them, making them worthy of admiration. By morning, the irritation faded beneath new layers of perfume and powder, and the cycle began again. Servants who handled the mixture often suffered worse than their mistresses. They inhaled the dust as they prepared it. Their fingers stained pink from constant contact. The air in dressing rooms shimmered faintly with floating particles of mercury. Some servants developed tremors in their hands or sores around their nails, but their complaints were dismissed as laziness. The nobility could not imagine that beauty itself was the cause of so much sickness. They believed themselves immune by virtue of rank, forgetting that poison makes no distinction between classes. The combination of cinnabar and candlelight created an atmosphere almost theatrical. In great halls and private chambers, the women glowed under the flickering flames, their skin reflecting the red undertones of the powder. To onlookers, they seemed ethereal, like saints in painted altarpieces. To themselves, they felt powerful, objects of reverence in a world that demanded constant display. The irony was that this power was purchased with weakness. Each layer of powder brought them closer to exhaustion, and each night of beauty stole a fraction of their strength. Even after the danger became whispered knowledge, few dared to stop. The habit had become an identity. A pale chest was not only admired but expected. Those who abandoned the ritual risked ridicule or suspicion. To appear too healthy was to seem immodest, too alive to be pure. And so the women continued, their beauty decaying beneath its own perfection. Husbands praised their wives' delicate complexions, never noticing the faint metallic smell that lingered on their skin or the coldness of their touch. Apothecaries made fortunes from this obsession. They sold different grades of cinnabar, some ground fine for the face, others coarse for the chest and arms. The most expensive powders promised eternal softness, though none lived long enough to test that claim. Recipes circulated in letters and diaries, describing mixtures of cinnabar with lead or chalk for extra radiance. These combinations only hastened the poisoning, yet the women spoke of them fondly, as if discussing secret charms passed down through generations. In portraits, the results were immortalized. Painters captured the pale glow of powdered skin with layers of white and vermilion, translating the shimmer of poison into art. The beauty of those faces, illuminated by invisible danger, became part of England's visual legacy. Centuries later, their portraits still hang in quiet galleries, flawless, serene, and utterly dead. The same glow that fascinated their admirers was the signal of their slow undoing. The legacy of cinnabar did not fade with the Tudor age. For centuries, the same pigment appeared in cosmetics, medicines, and paints, passed from one generation to the next as though it were harmless tradition. Even when the truth emerged, the fascination lingered. The idea that something deadly could create such beauty was too powerful to forget. It became a symbol of vanity itself, brilliant, fragile, and lethal. In the end, the women who wore cinnabar did not just adorn their skin, they turned their bodies into vessels of contradiction. Their beauty was both victory and defeat, an act of devotion to ideals that cared nothing for their survival. To glow beneath candlelight was to flirt with death, and in the flicker of each flame, death smiled back. The cinnabar powder that lit the necks of Tudor women made them luminous only in the eyes of others. Beneath that pale radiance, their bodies absorbed a slow, silent poison. As they dazzled in the candlelight, the same glow that drew admiration was already marking them for decay. In Tudor England, beauty was never accidental. It was engineered, layered, and fought for, inch by inch. Each part of the body was treated as a separate battlefield, armed with its own arsenal of powders, ointments, and tonics. The face burned beneath mercury. The neck shimmered under cinnabar. The hair stiffened with wax and filth. Even the hands, feet, and lips were subject to chemical assault in the pursuit of refinement. The result was a body that appeared pure, soft, and untouchable. Yet beneath the surface, it was breaking apart. To live beautifully meant to live in fragments, each part suffering quietly in service of the whole. The women who maintained this illusion learned early that beauty demanded strategy. They did not apply cosmetics at random. Each substance had its place, its specific function. Vinegar for the face, lead for the cheeks, chalk for the arms, and oils mixed with ashes for the hair. It was a map of suffering disguised as ritual. Their dressing tables looked less like places of vanity and more like laboratories, bowls of pastes, bottles of clear liquid, and powders so fine they drifted into the air like dust. To touch them was to handle poison, to wear them was to risk death, but to appear without them was social ruin. The language of beauty masked its violence. Every gesture was tender, every application precise. A woman's maid dabbed ointment on her mistress's skin with reverence, as though performing a sacred rite. They both understood what it cost, but spoke of it as care. The skin reddened, burned, or blistered, but the pain was interpreted as cleansing. Each sting was progress, each scar a sign of devotion. The process was endless because perfection was never achieved, only chased. The body became a project with no completion, a living monument to endurance. At court, the result of these rituals glittered beneath candlelight. Pale faces and glowing necks shimmered against the dark velvet of gowns. From a distance, the women looked ethereal, almost divine. Up close, the illusion fractured. The powder cracked at the edges of the lips, the eyes rimmed red from constant irritation. Beneath the perfume lay the sour trace of vinegar and sweat, yet no one dared to speak of it. The deception was mutual, shared between those who performed it and those who pretended to believe it. There is something tragic in how entire societies agree to worship what they know is false simply because truth feels too coarse to admire. Each chemical left its mark. Mercury hollowed the flesh, lead dulled the eyes, and vinegar carved thin red lines across the skin. These traces were concealed with new layers, more powders, and heavier scents, building a mask that grew thicker each year. By the time a woman reached middle age, her beauty was an artifact made of residue and memory. The face beneath had faded almost completely. Only the illusion remained, kept alive through endless reapplication. The irony was cruel. The more one tried to preserve beauty, the faster it disappeared. The body itself became unrecognizable. Skin hardened where the poison sank deepest, turning smooth but lifeless. The hands trembled from absorption, the teeth loosened, and the breath carried a faint metallic tang. Yet admiration persisted. Men praised their wives' delicate glow without realizing that the glow was a symptom. Artists painted their portraits with the same pale precision, capturing not women but the chemicals that consumed them. The ideal of beauty had stopped belonging to the living. It was now the perfection of something already half gone. Among the servants who prepared these mixtures, understanding came first. They saw the waste left behind, bowls of crusted lead paste, rags stained with blood, hair clumps caught in brushes. They smelled the rot beneath the perfume, but silence was part of their duty. To speak would be to accuse their mistresses of folly, and folly was safer than truth. So they kept quiet and watched, wiping away tears caused not by emotion but by the sting of fumes. The deeper tragedy was how beauty turned against the very body it claimed to honour. What was once meant to attract love began to repel life itself. The touch of a lover risked transferring poison. Kisses left traces of mercury that burned. Yet this intimacy only increased the appeal. To touch something so delicate, so easily destroyed, was proof of power. Beauty became dangerous, and danger became desirable. A pale cheek was a warning disguised as an invitation. The price of affection was contamination. Religious writers of the period condemned vanity but admired restraint. They saw in these pale, sickly women a reflection of holy suffering. The thinness, the fragility, the pallor. These were signs of spiritual discipline, not sickness. Thus, poison gained moral approval. A dying body looked pious. The more a woman's health faded, the more virtuous she seemed. The church and the court, in their different languages, both agreed that beauty should hurt. Over time, the layers of cosmetic warfare became invisible, absorbed into daily life. Recipes passed from mother to daughter, each generation inheriting both the knowledge and the damage. The poisons grew stronger as supplies improved. Imported substances from abroad, Venetian ceruse, Persian powders, and Spanish mercury, filled cabinets across England. The empire's wealth poured into its own slow suicide, sold in decorative jars labelled with grace and promise. The irony is that no one truly wanted longevity. The goal was not to survive, but to remain desirable for as long as possible. A long life held no glory if it came with wrinkles. The women who died young but beautiful were admired, their portraits remembered long after their bodies had decayed. Death itself was reimagined as the final act of perfection, the moment when beauty became eternal. The body, divided into regions of suffering, told the story of an era obsessed with control. There was no space left untouched by artifice. The skin bore the polish of death, the hair the stiffness of embalming, the lips the burn of toxins. To move through the world in such a state was to exist between life and display, breathing but not quite alive. In their relentless pursuit of admiration, Tudor women became walking paradoxes, symbols of purity built from corruption, adored for the very sickness that destroyed them. Their beauty was not a celebration of life, but an aesthetic of decay. Carefully maintained one patch of skin at a time, the bodies of Tudor women were maps of quiet destruction, each region poisoned in the name of perfection. Beneath every pale surface, sickness bloomed unseen, mistaken for grace. As their admirers reached for them, they touched not living flesh, but the fragile remains of beauty dying by its own hand. Among the many substances Tudor women pressed onto their skin, few were as intimate or as grotesque as the blood they used for their lips. The mouth, seen as a mark of youth and desire, was meant to appear soft, full, and red. Yet in an era when cosmetics were improvised from what nature and death provided, they turned to animal blood. Chicken and pig blood were the most common, mixed with oils or fat to keep the mixture pliable. It was applied gently, sometimes several times a day, until the lips shone with a wet, deep colour. The result looked healthy, almost alive. But beneath that vivid sheen was infection waiting to bloom. The practice carried an air of superstition as much as vanity. Blood was believed to contain vitality, warmth, and life itself. To rub it on the lips was to borrow that energy, to feed the face with borrowed strength. Women whispered that it could restore the glow lost to sickness or sleeplessness. The logic was primitive, but persuasive blood gave life, so it might also give beauty. The ritual became as ordinary as brushing hair. A few drops collected from the morning slaughter were enough to tint lips for the day. When mixed with oil, it spread smoothly, and for a brief moment the mouth appeared flushed with natural colour. But as the blood dried, it cracked, the lips tightened, the skin split, and infection followed. Servants prepared the mixture in bowls kept near the hearth. The smell was sharp and metallic, mingling with the smoke of burning tallow. Sometimes a spoonful of honey was added to sweeten the scent, though it did little to disguise it. The resulting salve glistened like lacquer under candlelight. Women stored it in small ceramic pots, carried it to gatherings, and reapplied it as needed. No one found it strange. Beauty, after all, had long been built upon sacrifice, and in Tudor England, the line between life and ornament was thin enough to bleed through. The first signs of trouble were subtle, a tingling on the lips, a faint swelling, a warmth that felt at first like health returning. But soon the discomfort deepened. The skin blistered, peeled, and filled with pus beneath the surface. Still, the irritation was often seen as a good sign, a proof that the remedy was working. The women pressed more of the mixture onto their wounds, hoping to heal with the same thing that caused the harm. When the swelling made their lips appear fuller, it was taken as success. What they called beauty was, in truth, inflammation. There is something both pitiful and familiar in how people can mistake the symptoms of injury for the signs of perfection. The appeal of blood-coloured lips went beyond vanity. Redness was tied to fertility, vitality, and sensual power. A pale face was pure, but pale lips suggested death. To correct that contrast, the Tudors turned to the most vivid symbol of life they knew, The irony was cruel. They sought the colour of vitality through the very substance that carried decay. As the lips grew sore and infected, they often appeared even redder, which only reinforced the illusion. Women looked in the mirror, saw the glow of suffering, and called it charm. The ingredients changed with wealth. The poor used whatever blood was available from the market or kitchen, often stored in unclean containers. The rich, seeking refinement, preferred fresher blood mixed with almond oil or beeswax. Some even added powdered coral or crushed rose petals to soften the texture. But no preparation could stop what followed. Bacteria thrived in the warm mixture, and each application pressed it deeper into the skin. Lips became raw, edges darkened, and sores opened that refused to heal. The smell, faintly sweet at first, turned foul. There were rumours of women who died from infections that began in the mouth. Physicians described mysterious fevers, abscesses, and swelling that spread to the throat. They blamed the air, or spoiled food, never suspecting the small jars of blood-coloured balm on their patients' tables. Deaths from vanity were quiet, private affairs, easy to dismiss. And so the practice continued, hidden behind polite conversation and perfume. In some houses, the use of blood was spiritualized. Clergymen warned against it, calling it sin, yet their words had the opposite effect. The forbidden allure only made the ritual seem more sacred. Women began to see the act as a form of offering, taking life from one creature to perfect their own. The stain of blood was no longer shameful but symbolic. It meant devotion to beauty, to order, to the strange logic of their age, where purity demanded contamination. The stains were difficult to remove. Even after washing, faint traces remained, darkening the corners of the mouth. Servants scrubbed their mistresses' lips with vinegar or ashes, only to leave them bleeding again. Over time, scar tissue formed, giving the lips a swollen, uneven appearance. Yet this imperfection, too, became fashionable. Men praised it as natural fullness, unaware of the pain it hid. The same mouths that smiled at court often burned in silence afterward. Apothecaries seized on the trend, selling vital salves that promised to harness the power of the living essence without decay. These were made from dried animal blood mixed with mercury salts or crushed minerals to preserve them. They were more stable, but far deadlier. The metal compounds leached into the bloodstream, dulling the senses and weakening the heart. The very act of smiling became dangerous, as the thin skin of the lips absorbed slow poison each day. Behind closed doors, the rituals continued. Women applied the balm before bed, believing it would keep their lips soft through the night. They slept with the faint smell of iron beneath their noses, half comforted, half suffocated by it. In the morning they reapplied it, beginning the cycle again. Each day the red deepened. Each day the flesh beneath died a little more, yet they could not stop. To face the world with pale lips was to confess decline. By the end of the Tudor era, the practice had spread so widely that no one questioned it. The stain of blood had become synonymous with femininity itself. It appeared in portraits, on tapestries, in poems. Artists painted lips that glowed like rubies, symbols of health and temptation. But those lips, in life, were far from alive. Beneath the colour was pain, and behind the smile was rot. The jars that held these mixtures still survive in museums, their lids cracked, their contents long dried to dust. The labels, lip salve, rouge of vitality, read like quiet jokes left by history. They remind us how deeply the Tudors confused the act of adorning the body with the act of consuming it. Their beauty was not an expression of life, but a constant flirtation with death. The blood balms of Tudor women gave their lips the colour of vitality while feeding them decay. The glow they cherished came from swelling and infection, not health. As they painted life upon their mouths, They were unknowingly writing the slow confession of their own destruction. In the Tudor world, wealth had a taste, and that taste was sugar. It was not a daily indulgence, but a rare treasure, imported in small quantities and guarded like gold. Only the richest households could afford it, and so sweetness itself became a mark of power. The noble tables glittered with candied fruits, sweetened wines, and sugared pastries served more to be admired than eaten. For Tudor women, sugar was more than food. It was proof of belonging. Its effects, however, were written plainly on their teeth: cavities, decay, and the slow darkening of enamel were the trophies of privilege. A ruined mouth meant a refined life. In time, women who could not afford sugar began to imitate those who could, staining their teeth black on purpose to appear wealthy. What had once been a symptom of rot became the fashion of the refined. The change began quietly among the royal court. Queen Elizabeth herself was notorious for her love of sweets. She dined on sugar-dipped violets, preserved fruits, and dense confections shaped like jewels. Her teeth, once white, turned dark and brittle, yet no one dared to comment. Instead, courtiers copied her habits, mistaking sickness for splendour. If the Queen's teeth were black, then black must be beautiful, in portraits. Her smile was always closed, her lips painted crimson to hide the truth. Behind that perfect image, rot spread slowly through the royal mouth, and England followed her lead. Sugar was expensive, and so was the damage it caused. Apothecaries offered powders and pastes to polish teeth, each promising to restore whiteness. Most were made of crushed seashells or ground stones that stripped away enamel, deepening the damage. Yet these remedies sold well. The wealthy bought them eagerly, applying them after every meal of sweets, scraping away the protection their teeth still had left. The poor watched this strange ritual and saw an opportunity. If bad teeth were a sign of refinement, then imitation could buy the illusion of nobility. In small towns, women mixed soot with oil and rubbed it along their teeth until they shone black. Others used burnt rosemary or ground coal, applying it like paint before gatherings. The effect was convincing from a distance, especially by candlelight. The blackened teeth gleamed faintly, a strange mix of decay and elegance. To the untrained eye, it looked like money. It was an art of pretending, of turning poverty into parody. There is something darkly clever in how people can turn their own deprivation into imitation, wearing ruin like a badge of honour. The taste for sugar reshaped Tudor life far beyond appearance. Kitchens became laboratories of indulgence. Honey was pushed aside, replaced by imported sugar from distant colonies. Confectioners carved sugar into elaborate sculptures, castles, swans, and entire banquets made from crystallized sweetness. Guests marvelled at the spectacle, knowing it would dissolve by the end of the evening. The destruction was part of the pleasure. What mattered was the display, not the consumption. It was beauty meant to decay, just like the people who ate it. Those who could afford constant sweetness carried the marks of it. Their gums swelled, their breath soured, and their teeth loosened until they fell out entirely. The pain was excruciating, but it was endured in silence. Physicians offered clove oil or wine as relief, but nothing slowed the decay. The irony was complete. The richest mouths in England were also the most ruined. And yet, they were envied. Blackened teeth became the ultimate status symbol, visible proof that one lived among abundance. In poorer homes, the mimicry bordered on desperation. Young women seeking marriage darkened their teeth before festivals, hoping to seem more desirable. The sight of blackened enamel, once revolting, became strangely alluring. Men associated it with luxury, imagining the women who wore it were used to fine food and soft living. The deception worked. A few drops of soot could turn a labourer's daughter into someone who looked like she belonged in a manor hall. The mask was convincing enough until she spoke or smiled too widely. revealing the raw gums beneath. The contradiction fascinated foreign visitors. Accounts from travellers described English women with teeth like coal, worn proudly as though they were jewels. To outsiders, it was madness. To the English, it was fashion. Decay had been transformed into decoration, just as lead had become powder and mercury had become ointment. The same logic ruled every part of Tudor beauty pain. Rot and sickness could be refined into symbols of grace. Sugar itself was a paradox, a sweetness born of cruelty. Imported through the labour of enslaved people, it carried the weight of suffering long before it reached English tables. Each cube, each spoonful, was built upon unseen agony, yet no one spoke of it. To eat sugar was to participate in distant violence, to consume the comfort that others had paid for in blood. In this way, the blackened teeth of Tudor nobles were not only a personal affliction, but a quiet echo of the empire's sins. As the century wore on, sugar addiction became too widespread to hide. Children of the wealthy grew up with mouths full of decay, their gums bleeding long before adulthood. The pain was dulled with wine or opium, but the damage was permanent. Teeth were pulled and replaced with wooden pegs or animal bone, crude substitutes that rotted in turn. Yet the symbol of blackened teeth persisted. It was no longer just fashion, it was identity. By the time awareness of sugar's harm spread, the damage was too deep. The same empire that prided itself on progress could not imagine life without its sweetness. The nobles who once flaunted their ruined smiles were remembered not as victims but as icons. Their portraits still hang in galleries, lips closed over darkened mouths, gazes serene. The sickness beneath the beauty has been forgotten, polished away by time. The imitation of rot as refinement reveals the heart of Tudor vanity. Beauty was never about health, only about hierarchy. The body was a stage where pain could masquerade as privilege. Every mark of decay, every flaw transformed into fashion, proved that status could turn even corruption into elegance. The blackened teeth of Tudor women glittered with the false promise of wealth, each one a quiet confession of sweetness turned to poison. Their smiles, once symbols of luxury, became emblems of decay mistaken for grace. When imitations spread from the palace to the market, England learned to love the taste of its own ruin. The Tudor obsession with purity did not stop at the face. It extended to the entire body, which was treated as both a temple and a testing ground for dangerous experiments. Among the nobility, bathing was not a matter of cleanliness but of ritual. Water itself was mistrusted, believed to spread illness. So when Tudor women bathed, it was rarely in plain water. They preferred mixtures, rose water for fragrance, herbs for healing, and, most curiously, animal blood for vitality. In their minds, this blend united beauty and strength, warmth and youth. The result was a strange luxury that left the skin flushed, soft, and often infected. What began as an imitation of life ended as contact with decay. Rosewater was considered divine, a symbol of refinement. It masked the odours of daily life and was believed to open the pores and brighten the complexion. Bowls of it were poured into wooden tubs, filling rooms with a sweet, heady scent. But some women took the ritual further, adding small quantities of fresh sheep's blood. The idea was simple and horrifying. The warmth of the blood was thought to awaken the flesh, to infuse it with vigour. Blood represented vitality in every sense, and Tudor beauty was obsessed with keeping that vitality visible. To bathe in it was not superstition, it was fashion. Servants were sent to collect the blood early in the morning. It had to be fresh, still warm, or it was considered useless. Mixed with rosewater, it produced a faintly pink liquid that looked delicate but smelled of iron. The women stepped into it slowly, their movements careful, as if entering sacred ground. For a brief moment, the warmth made them feel alive. The skin tingled, the colour deepened, and under candlelight, the illusion of health returned. They left the tub glowing, but beneath that glow was irritation waiting to bloom. The first sensation after such baths was always pleasure. The blood's protein content left a film on the skin that made it feel smooth, almost silky. Some compared it to velvet, but within hours, itching began. The mixture, thick and unclean, clogged the pores. The slightest scratch opened the door to infection. Small cuts turned red and swollen, forming ulcers that refused to heal. Still, the baths continued. The discomfort was dismissed as proof that the treatment worked. It is both tragic and absurd how easily suffering becomes a sign of success when beauty is the goal. The nobles who could afford these rituals believed themselves above sickness. They mistook privilege for protection. Physicians warned them against using blood, noting that it spoiled quickly and carried disease, but their advice was ignored. Purity, in the Tudor sense, was not about health. It was about appearance. A woman's worth was measured by her colour and her scent, not by the state of her body. And so the tubs of rosewater and blood returned, week after week, leaving a faint trail of perfume and decay through the corridors of great houses. The rituals were elaborate. Before bathing, maids sprinkled crushed herbs, lavender, thyme, and sage into the liquid to disguise the smell. Afterward, they patted the skin with linen towels scented with vinegar. The result was a faint balance between sweetness and rot, a fragrance that clung to the skin like memory. Guests who caught the scent mistook it for luxury. Only those who cleaned the tubs knew what floated at the bottom once the water cooled. The mixture also left stains. Drops splashed onto the floor, streaking the tiles with pink. The maids scrubbed until their hands bled, yet the smell lingered. In some households, cats or dogs were drawn to the room, licking at the edges of the tub. The scene, though never discussed, said everything about the illusion of Tudor beauty. It attracted both admiration and vermin. To the women themselves, the ritual was worth it. The redness it left behind was praised as natural bloom, a mark of youth renewed. The irony of bathing in blood was lost on a few observers. Foreign visitors recorded their shock, describing English ladies of sweet odour and crimson skin, unaware of the recipe behind it. To them, it seemed a barbaric luxury. But within Tudor England, excess had its own logic. The same society that powdered its face with lead and painted its lips with mercury saw nothing strange in soaking its skin in blood. It almost feels as though their beauty rituals were rehearsals for their own decay, performed gracefully under the guise of elegance. Over time, the custom trickled down to those who could not afford true rosewater. They substituted vinegar or even sour milk, which only worsened the irritation. Without perfume to hide the smell, the baths reeked of animal rot. Yet poor women continued, believing it would whiten their skin and prove their discipline. The devotion to beauty was democratic in its cruelty. Whether rich or poor, the goal was the same: to appear untouched by the filth of daily life, even if it meant bathing in it. The lasting damage was severe. Skin peeled, wounds festered, and fevers spread quietly through the households. A few deaths were whispered about but never investigated. People blamed the air, the dampness, or witchcraft, never the ritual itself. The blood baths had become too ingrained to question. They were part of what defined refinement, a marker of womanhood as much as the corset or the mirror. To abandon them would be to admit that the ideal of Tudor beauty was poisoned at its core. The tubs themselves were works of art, carved wood lined with lead or pewter. The irony of that detail was cruel, as the metal seeped slowly into the skin along with the blood. Every attempt to preserve youth carried within it the seeds of decay. The Tudors, obsessed with control, never realized how completely their rituals controlled them instead. In the dim glow of candlelight, the room after such a bath must have looked both beautiful and terrible. Steam rose from the tub, carrying the mixed scent of roses and iron. The woman's reflection shimmered on the surface, blurred, ghostly, and flushed. She might have thought herself reborn, her body renewed, her youth restored. But what she saw was not rebirth. It was a slow surrender to rot disguised as radiance. The Tudor bath was meant to restore purity, but left behind infection and deceit. The women who stepped into rosewater and blood emerged glowing with life borrowed from death. When the scent faded, all that remained was the quiet truth that beauty in this world always came with a price soaked into the skin. Tudor beauty was never gentle. Behind every powdered cheek and polished smile lay a kind of endurance that would horrify modern eyes. To be beautiful in that era was to suffer silently, to accept pain as proof of worth. Women learned early that their reflection was a battlefield, and every morning began with the sound of scraping, mixing, and burning. They covered scars from past experiments with new layers of poison, convincing themselves that the sting meant transformation. It was not madness in their minds, only dedication. Their faces became maps of both devotion and decay, their beauty routines closer to surgery than self-care. In the quiet of their chambers, the rituals began like ceremonies. Servants prepared powders and pastes that reeked of vinegar and metal. The women sat still, faces tilted toward the light, while mixtures of mercury and vinegar were brushed across their skin. These concoctions promised to remove freckles, erase blemishes, and tighten the flesh. Instead, they peeled layers of skin away, leaving raw redness that burned long after the mirror was covered again. Yet, in that redness, they saw hope. It is grimly fascinating that in a world so obsessed with salvation, the path to beauty required its own kind of crucifixion. The tools were primitive, yet the precision was deliberate. Needles were used to puncture blisters, and razors to scrape off peeling layers. Some women even pricked their cheeks to let a small trace of blood appear, believing that colour meant youth. The sting of acid was endured with clenched teeth, and the ache of open wounds was covered by thicker coats of lead powder, day after day. They built new faces over the ruins of the old ones, each layer heavier, more toxic, more necessary. The mirror became a confessor, reflecting both guilt and pride. Pain was not just tolerated, it was admired. The women compared how long they could hold still during treatments, boasting quietly of their endurance. A queen could not flinch, nor could a lady of the court show weakness before her maids. Their beauty depended on control, and control demanded silence. Even as skin split and bled beneath the makeup, their posture never faltered. To faint was foolishness, to scream was disgrace. Their calm faces, pale and polished, hid the agony beneath. It feels almost theatrical, a performance where elegance and agony shared the same mask. The substances they used were as cruel as they were common. Mercury ate through the flesh, lead clogged the pores, and vinegar burned open the wounds that never healed. Still, they called it refinement. Physicians offered little resistance. After all, beauty was a woman's duty, not her right. Husbands praised pale faces and soft hands, never questioning what made them that way. The court adored its painted women, radiant under candlelight but fragile in daylight. Behind closed doors, the reality was ghastly. Skin blistered, lips cracked, and eyes wept from irritation. The smell of chemicals clung to them. A faint metallic scent followed wherever they went, mingling with the perfume of rosewater and sweat. Their pillows were stained with powder, their collars dusted with flakes of white residue. Each night, they wiped away one layer only to reveal another beneath it, as though their beauty had become inseparable from the toxins that sustained it. Modern skincare claims to fight time. Tudor beauty fought survival itself, and often lost. These daily tortures were seen as discipline. The pain was not just endured but spiritualized. To maintain beauty despite suffering was to prove moral strength. The women were told that their ability to bear discomfort made them virtuous, that perfection demanded patience. Their torment became virtue, their suffering sanctified. The line between vanity and martyrdom blurred, leaving behind a strange religion of the flesh. There were, of course, casualties. Some women collapsed during their routines, poisoned by fumes or weakened by infection. Others went blind from contact with mercury vapours or lost patches of hair where the skin refused to heal. Yet, even in death, they were admired for their beauty. Stories spread of noble women whose corpses remained white and smooth, as though untouched by decay. It was said the poisons preserved them. No one saw the irony that these same substances had killed them. The most haunting image is not of death but of endurance. Picture a woman seated before her mirror at dusk, her face already stinging from earlier treatments. She dips her brush into a jar of fresh powder, ignoring the ache in her hands. The candle beside her flickers, catching the shimmer of lead across her skin. She inhales the faint sweetness of perfume that cannot mask the metal. Her reflection stares back, ghostly, perfect, doomed. She does not blink. This devotion to beauty was more than vanity. It was identity. To appear flawless was to secure position, affection, and survival. Those who refused the ritual were mocked or forgotten. Every patch of red, every tremor of pain was hidden behind the mask of grace. And so the cycle repeated: pain, powder, poison, performance. They believed that if they played the part perfectly, the illusion would become truth. Under the heavy silence of Tudor nights, their bodies betrayed them. Hands trembled, teeth loosened, skin peeled away in secret. Yet, the next morning, they rose again, painted again, smiled again. The empire admired its glow without seeing the rot beneath it. In the end, the art of Tudor beauty was not about creation but destruction made elegant. Every morning began with hope and ended in quiet agony. They suffered not for love but for the reflection that society demanded. Beneath the shimmer of lead and silk, beauty was never gentle. It was surgery without mercy, performed before a mirror instead of a blade. The face of a Tudor woman was never truly still. Beneath the layers of powder, paste, and polish, the skin shifted, cracked, and wept quietly through the day. Each morning began with perfection, but by noon the mask had already started to crumble. The lead powder that once looked smooth turned brittle, splitting along the natural lines of the face. Every smile, every word, every faint expression created new fractures. To maintain the illusion of flawlessness, they carried small mirrors and pots of powder, always ready to repair what time and movement destroyed. Their beauty was a performance that required constant maintenance, an hourly ritual of decay disguised as devotion. Lead powder was thick, heavy, and deceptive. When first applied, it gave the illusion of soft light, a faint glow that reflected the wealth and control expected of noble women. But as it dried, it hardened, drawing the skin beneath it tight. The surface cracked in tiny veins, and from those cracks came discomfort that grew into pain. The mixture absorbed sweat, oil, and dust from the air, turning into a paste that suffocated the skin. By the middle of the day, the powder no longer looked like skin at all. It resembled plaster, brittle and ghostly. To fix it, they reapplied. Each layer was meant to smooth over the last, but instead, it deepened the damage. The lead sank further into pores already raw from daily use. The skin could no longer breathe, yet the effort continued. Vanity demanded persistence. To appear perfect, the Tudors willingly repainted themselves again and again, even as the poisons beneath the surface took their toll. It is disturbing to think that for them, beauty meant layering their own suffering until it looked convincing enough to be admired. Servants carried trays of cosmetics throughout the day, waiting just out of sight. When a woman's face began to fade, she summoned them discreetly, dabbing powder onto the nose, the forehead, the cheeks. Sometimes it took only a few minutes, sometimes half an hour. The process repeated every few hours, from sunrise to the evening feast. By nightfall, her face might have borne 6 or 7 layers of paint, each one heavier and more toxic than the last. Beneath the powder, her real skin itched and burned. Some wiped their faces only partially at night, afraid of what they would find underneath. The lead mixed with sweat formed a thin paste that slid slowly down the jawline, staining the collars of dresses. Those stains were carefully hidden with lace or pearls. Women learned to move with stiffness, avoiding laughter or frowns that might cause more cracks. Their smiles became measured, their gestures restrained, their elegance sculpted by fear of imperfection. The body obeyed the demands of beauty, even when it hurt. Those who could afford more makeup wore it as armour. The thicker the layer, the higher the status. Common women imitated the style with chalk and vinegar, though their cheaper mixtures corroded the skin even faster. Across classes, the same story unfolded, faces built upon decay. Physicians tried to warn them that lead entered the bloodstream, that the headaches and trembling hands were signs of poisoning, but warnings meant little compared to appearances. The mirror's approval mattered more than health. The worst part came when the powder met moisture. On hot days, sweat would gather beneath the surface of the makeup, loosening it from the skin. The mixture would bubble, shift, and eventually leak, turning greyish-white and sticky. Some women described it as their faces melting. They would retreat quickly to their chambers to reapply, avoiding witnesses to the slow collapse of their illusion. The very air around them carried the metallic taste of decay. At banquets, the light of hundreds of candles made everything shimmer. The lead powder reflected beautifully, glowing faintly under the flicker of flame. For a few hours, they looked radiant again, almost supernatural. But as the night deepened and the heat rose, the illusion began to break. Drops of sweat formed at the temples, streaking white lines down the cheeks. The same beauty that drew attention also betrayed them, melting before their peers. Still, they smiled. They always smiled. It's strange how easily dignity can survive even when the flesh beneath it is given up. By morning, the consequences appeared, swelling around the eyes, sores along the jaw, and a thin film of pus where the skin had split overnight. Some called these small sacrifices. Others insisted it was proof that their beauty regimen was working, that the pain meant purification. The more their skin rebelled, the more they covered it. The paint did not hide the damage. It concealed the evidence of a culture that worshipped perfection at any cost. In time, the layers of powder became inseparable from the skin itself. Some women's faces turned permanently pale, others blotched with grey. Their features blurred under years of paint, the distinction between person and mask fading away. Theirs was not beauty, it was preservation of appearance, embalming done while still alive. To be seen without makeup would have been shameful, almost indecent. The idea of bare skin was associated with poverty, sickness, or madness. Behind the elegance of Tudor portraits lies this truth. Each of those perfect faces was crafted daily from poison, maintained with agony, and repaired until the body could no longer bear it. Beneath the silk and jewels was a surface that cracked, bled, and dissolved slowly under its own artifice. Their beauty did not fade with age, it rotted, layer by layer, into the same cold whiteness they once admired. The Tudor face was not born each morning but built, maintained, and buried again by night. The same powders that gave them beauty hollowed them out from within. In chasing an image of grace, they learned too late that perfection always demands skin in exchange. They could not remember when it began, only that one day it was no longer a choice. The mask had become part of them, pressed into the skin so completely that they could not separate what was real from what was painted. To live in Tudor society was to be seen, and to be seen meant to perform. They did not wake to greet the sun, but to rebuild the illusion that kept them safe. Before a mirror clouded with powder dust, they traced the same lines every morning, the lead on the forehead, the rouge on the cheeks, the faint shimmer along the neck. Each stroke carried a memory of expectation, each layer a reminder that their faces no longer belonged to them. Even in sickness, the routine continued. Servants moved softly through the bedchambers carrying small pots of powder, their hands steady from practice. The smell of vinegar, wax, and metal filled the room, cutting through the air as sharply as the silence that accompanied it. They were told that no illness excused ugliness. Fever might redden the skin, exhaustion might dim the eyes, but those things could be hidden. So they painted, even as their hands trembled, and called it courage. A bare face was shame, a confession of decline. To be seen unpainted was to invite whispers, pity, or disgust. There was no sanctuary from judgment. The house, the court, even the servant's gaze became extensions of the public eye. They had learned to fear it. Mirrors lined the corridors, and behind every mirror was the same question: am I still beautiful enough to be accepted? They avoided looking too long, for what they saw beneath the layers frightened them. The powder cracked when they smiled, the rouge peeled when they cried. Each movement betrayed the body beneath, and yet to show that body was forbidden. Their reflection stared back, perfect and hollow, as if mocking the human underneath. It is haunting to think that a life could be spent maintaining a face one was never meant to live in. Morning light was both a blessing and a punishment. The candles of evening softened their flaws, but daylight revealed every fissure. They learned to move through it carefully, to keep their heads tilted just so, to let the shadows fall in their favour. Behind the shimmering veils and stiff collars, their skin burned from the mixture of lead and oil. The beauty they wore so proudly at court turned against them in private. The ache beneath the powder grew familiar, an invisible companion that followed them everywhere. Even when the room emptied, they were not alone. The mask watched them. It had a life of its own. To remove it felt wrong, indecent, as if they were stripping away more than paint. Some tried at night, washing their faces with rose water and lemon, only to flinch when they saw the raw, blotched skin that stared back. Others refused entirely. They slept with their faces covered, the scent of metal pressed into their pillows. In the mornings, when servants came to refresh the powder, they never saw what lay beneath. It was as if the mask had replaced the woman. Their families accepted it, even encouraged it. A husband might remark that his wife looked pale and charming, never realizing that the whiteness was the colour of decay. Mothers taught daughters how to blend powder along the jawline, how to smile without cracking the paint, and how to sleep upright so the makeup would not smear. These lessons were given gently, passed down like virtues. To appear perfect was to be respectable. To appear tired or natural was to invite disgrace. The line between decency and illusion vanished so gradually that no one noticed. They did not rebel. There was nothing to rebel against, because there had never been another way. The act of painting their faces was as natural as breathing. They told themselves it was protection, not deception, a shield against scrutiny, a tool for survival. Yet with every layer added, the shield became heavier. Beneath it, the skin suffocated, and beneath that, the person disappeared. Their names remained, their titles endured, but their features were lost. Even those who loved them could not recall their unpainted faces. The fear of exposure grew with time. A sudden knock at the door, an unexpected visitor. Even the sound of footsteps in the corridor could send them scrambling for powder. They moved through life in quiet panic, clutching small mirrors and tins of rouge as if they were charms against humiliation. The rituals stretched into the night. Some applied a thin layer before sleeping. just enough to maintain the illusion for anyone who might enter unannounced. To die without makeup was unthinkable. To be buried without it, unholy. In rare moments of solitude, they wondered who they had been before the mask. There were whispers of women who had tried to stop, who refused the lead, who faced the world with unpainted skin. Those women were ridiculed, called careless or mad. Their bravery became cautionary tales, reminders of what happened when one defied beauty. So the others continued, layering their fear with powder until it became invisible. It is almost tender, in a cruel way. How they mistook submission for strength. Over the years, the powder sank deeper, not only into the skin but into memory. Their portraits were painted in the same shades, chalk white, crimson lips, blank perfection. The artist captured what the world demanded, not what was real. Future generations would call them elegant, graceful, untouchable, never realizing that the beauty in those paintings was a lie that cost them everything. The same lie was repeated in every household, on every face, until truth itself became impolite. Some of them forgot their own reflections entirely. The woman beneath the powder was a stranger, the mirror an intruder. They saw themselves as others saw them, flawless, silent, decorative. The longer they lived this way, the more the illusion became their truth. They began to believe the mask was mercy, that without it, the world would not love them, that they would not even love themselves. The tragedy was not that they were forced to wear it, but that they no longer wished to take it off. In the end, their beauty was preserved not in life but in myth. History remembers the painted faces, not the peeling flesh. The soft light of portraits hides what candlelight once revealed. The sweat, the sores, the quiet exhaustion of pretending. Beneath the perfection lies a story of women who erased themselves for acceptance, who turned their own bodies into canvases for society's expectations. They no longer lived behind masks, they became them. Every layer of powder, every coat of paint was a promise to the world that they would remain beautiful, no matter the cost. When they looked into the mirror, they no longer sought recognition but reassurance. And in that endless reflection, they vanished entirely, leaving only the mask to remember them. They were remembered for their beauty, but beauty was the very thing that destroyed them. The women of the Tudor courts lived surrounded by mirrors, perfumes, and poisons, each reflection brighter and more deceptive than the last. They pursued a perfection that glowed under candlelight yet consumed them in silence. To the outside world, they were visions of grace, pale, flawless, untouched by time. But beneath the white powder and rouge, their bodies betrayed the truth. Their lips cracked, their gums bled, their hair fell away in handfuls, and their veins carried slow rivers of poison. It was not fate that killed them young. It was the artifice of beauty, perfected into death. Lead seeped through their pores, gathering in their bones and organs, dulling their minds until even memory itself grew sluggish. They trembled when they raised their cups, their fingers turning stiff and blue. The skin that once drew admiration began to peel, the same whiteness that made them adored becoming the pallor of sickness. Physicians called it a mysterious decline. No one dared call it what it was, vanity turned into execution. Yet they continued, smiling through pain, because in their world, to fade was to disappear. They measured their worth in years of radiance, not in years of life. The court was cruel in its admiration. Beauty gained favour, and favour secured survival. Without it, they became invisible. So they painted themselves alive, hiding decay under layers of shimmering death. The ritual had become sacred. The mirror, their altar, the powder, their sacrament. They died not as victims but as believers, faithful to the illusion until the end. There is something eerily noble about devotion so complete that it consumes the worshipper entirely. Those who died young were mourned as tragic angels. women too pure, too delicate for the world. Their pallid faces in death were praised for serenity, not recognized as the final stillness of poisoning. The same hands that mixed the lead and mercury prepared their bodies for burial, smoothing the very powders that had killed them over their faces one last time. Even in death, the mask had to remain perfect. Their beauty was preserved as a myth, a gentle lie painted across generations. Their portraits hung in palaces, glowing softly in the dim light, faces frozen in eternal calm. No artist captured the sores beneath the paint, the trembling that hid behind composure. History remembered them as elegant, virtuous, divine. What it forgot was the slow collapse beneath the surface, the quiet erosion of life disguised as refinement. In those still images, they live forever, beautiful and silent, as if the centuries conspired to protect their secret. But the truth lingered in small ways. Servants whispered about the strange smells that clung to their rooms, the stains on their pillows, the sudden deaths that followed long periods of vanity. Doctors began to notice the pattern, though few dared to challenge the customs of the court. For every noble woman who died, another took her place, wearing the same powders, following the same rituals, believing she would be spared. The illusion was stronger than reason. To question it was to risk exile from beauty itself. Those who survived into middle age carried the marks of their devotion, their teeth blackened, their skin thinned until the veins shone blue beneath it, and their minds dimmed from years of contamination. Some forgot their words mid-sentence. Others grew sensitive to light, flinching even in gentle sun. Yet they clung to their mirrors, touching their faces with trembling fingers, as if trying to remember who they had been. The mask was all that remained, and it was enough. To outsiders, Tudor England appeared magnificent, with palaces, silk gowns, and banquets glittering with gold. But beneath the finery, the women were dying quietly, their deaths folded neatly into the rhythm of daily life. No one questioned why beauty required such suffering. They accepted it the way they accepted cold winters or early graves. Pain was part of existence, and for women it was the price of admiration. The irony was that their torment became invisible precisely because they endured it beautifully. There is a strange peace in imagining them now, centuries later, freed from the weight of appearance. Their portraits still gaze down from museum walls, the lead in the paint echoing the lead in their blood. Their stillness has become eternal. They are no longer hiding, no longer pretending, yet the quiet ache of their story endures, the reminder that behind every ideal of perfection lies someone who suffered to create it. It feels almost intimate to realize that their beauty was not a gift from nature, but a confession of pain turned into art. What makes their tragedy endure is not only the death that followed, but the silence that surrounded it. The Tudor age celebrated refinement, self-control, and obedience. These women embodied all three, sacrificing health and happiness to uphold ideals that never loved them back. Their deaths were not seen as warnings, but as testaments to devotion. The world praised them for the very discipline that destroyed them. Their suffering did not end with them. The legacy of their beauty shaped generations to come. Each century found new poisons, new rituals, new ways to chase perfection. From powders to corsets to starvation diets, the same pattern repeated under new disguises. The Tudor woman may be gone, but her reflection lingers in every era that values appearance over existence. Beauty remains a fragile currency, traded at the cost of peace. Perhaps what lingers most is the sadness of realization, the understanding that these women did not die in vain, but in ignorance. They believed they were cultivating grace when they were cultivating grief. They trusted what they were told, believing that elegance could be achieved through endurance, that love could be earned through perfection. Their world rewarded them for dying beautifully, and in that twisted sense, they succeeded. Now, their story feels distant yet familiar. The The same desire to appear flawless still whispers through modern mirrors, though the poisons have changed names. The lead is gone, but the hunger for approval remains. It is difficult not to wonder how much of them still survives within us, in the way we polish, adjust, and hide ourselves from the world's gaze. They may have lived centuries ago, but the ghosts of their reflection still flicker whenever beauty demands pain. As the candlelight fades in imagination, one can almost see them, women of pale faces and heavy gowns, sitting quietly before mirrors that no longer show truth. They dip their brushes into powder, steady their trembling hands, and whisper to themselves that it is worth it. They believe it because they must. In that dim room, the air thick with scent and silence, beauty becomes both their crown and their curse. They died as they lived, adorned, admired, and slowly undone. The perfection they sought turned against them, leaving behind only portraits of serenity masking centuries of quiet torment. Their story is not one of vanity but of faith misplaced, of devotion to an ideal that demanded everything and gave nothing back. Beauty, for them, was never freedom. It was the slowest form of death. And now, as you close your eyes and let the past drift into quietness, imagine their faces fading gently into darkness, the powders settling, the mirrors dimming. The noise of the court falls away, leaving only stillness. Sleep softly tonight, far from the poisons they once trusted, untouched by the masks they could not remove. Let their story rest with them, beneath the layers of time and silence. Good night, and may your dreams be gentler than theirs ever were.